child tied to a tree in the middle of nowhere, barefoot, freezing, alive, barely. The man who found her hadn't spoken to another human being in 11 days. He'd been riding to disappear, not to save anyone. But when his headlight split the darkness and found those small bare feet dangling 6 inches above frozen ground, something older than reason took over. Something that had survived the worst years of his life and refused, even now, to die completely. What he didn't know yet, what would cost him everything before it was over, was that the person who put that child there wasn't hiding in the woods. She was sleeping peacefully in a beautiful house in town, with a reputation so clean it blinded everyone around her. If this story hits something deep in your chest, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments right now, and stay with us until the very end. You will not want to miss what happens next. The highway had no name on any map Ray Mercer trusted anymore. He'd been riding it for 11 days straight, pushing west through the gut of the Pacific Northwest, with no destination worth naming and no one waiting on the other end. The Harley, a 2003 Road King he'd rebuilt twice with his own hands, ran rough in the cold, the engine knocking low and rhythmic like a second heartbeat that didn't care whether its owner wanted to keep living. Ray had come to appreciate that about machines. They kept going whether you asked them to or not. It was December. The temperature gauge at the last gas station outside of Kettrick Falls had read 19 degrees Fahrenheit, and that was 3 hours ago, before the elevation climbed and the sky sealed itself shut with the kind of dense, starless cloud cover that made the darkness feel pressurized. His breath came out in hard bursts against his balaclava. His fingers, even inside the insulated gloves, had gone numb somewhere around the second hour. He rode anyway. Ray Mercer was 53 years old and had the particular kind of face that made strangers uncomfortable. Not because it was ugly, but because it looked like it had been through something that had earned every line. A jaw like weathered granite, eyes the color of old ice, a scar that ran from his left temple to just below his cheekbone, pale against his skin, the memory of a bar fight in Billings 7 years back that he'd neither started nor finished cleanly. His riding leathers were black, worn to a soft mat at the elbows and shoulders, the back panel bare where a patch had been removed years ago. Removed carefully, with a knife and deliberate patience, like cutting out a piece of himself. He didn't belong to anyone anymore. That was the point of the ride. 11 months since Sophie. He couldn't call it by its real name yet, couldn't say the word. His daughter had been 8 years old, and the drunk driver who crossed the center line on Route 9 outside of Coeur d'Alene had walked away from the wreck with a broken collarbone. Ray had arrived at the hospital 47 minutes after it happened, riding 90 miles an hour through the dark, and the doctor who met him in the hallway had the kind of face that told the story before the mouth could form the words. He hadn't cried. He wasn't sure he could anymore. What he'd done instead was ride, east to west, north to south, highway to highway, diner to diner, motel to nowhere, as if movement itself might eventually outpace the thing sitting in the center of his chest. So far, it hadn't. His headlight swept the curve ahead, catching the silver suggestion of a guardrail, and beyond it, a wall of Douglas fir so dense and dark it looked like the edge of the world. The road was empty. It had been empty for an hour. Out here, between Kettrick Falls and the logging camp town of Harlan Creek, there was nothing but elevation and pine and the kind of silence that had weight, which was why the shape registered before his brain fully processed what it was. He saw it in the peripheral reach of his headlight, something white, low, slightly to the left of the road's shoulder, a few meters back from the tree line. He was doing 60. By the time the shape clarified into something that didn't belong, something small, something human, he had already passed it. Ray stood on the brakes. The Harley fishtailed on the half-frozen asphalt, rear wheel sliding wide before the tires caught. He controlled it without thinking, body memory doing the work while his mind was still locked on what he'd seen in that quarter second of illumination. He brought the bike to a stop on the shoulder, killed the engine, and sat for 3 full seconds in the sudden silence before he got off. He walked back along the road edge with his flashlight out, the beam sweeping the ground. Frost on dead grass. Tire tracks in the roadside mud, days old and partially frozen. Pine needles. And then, at the break in the guardrail where an old fire access road cut into the trees, the shape again. A little girl. She was tied to a pine tree 7 feet off the fire road, wrists bound with electrical zip ties around the trunk behind her, arms stretched back at an angle that had to have been excruciating. She was wearing a thin cotton dress, white with small blue flowers, the kind of dress you'd put a child in for a spring photograph, and it was soaking wet from the cold ground she'd partially slid down. Her feet were bare, both of them. No shoes, no socks. Her feet had gone the color of old wax against the frozen pine needles. Ray stood there for exactly 2 seconds, flashlight beam fixed on her face. She was conscious, barely. Her eyes were open, dark brown, huge, set in a face so pale it looked like carved soap. And when the light hit her, she flinched, a tiny convulsion of the muscles around her eyes. The instinctive response of a child who'd learned that sudden light usually preceded something bad. "Hey," Ray said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. It had been 11 days since he'd used it. "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you." Her lips moved. He stepped closer, crouching, keeping the flashlight angled away from her eyes. "Please," she whispered. The word barely existed. It was made of almost no air. "Help me." He already had the multi-tool out of his jacket pocket before she finished saying it. The zip ties were the heavy-gauge kind, commercial strength, the kind sold in hardware stores. And there were 3 of them linking her wrist to the tree. Ray cut through them in under 40 seconds, keeping his movements deliberate and visible, talking to her the whole time in the low, even monotone he'd once used to talk Sophie down from nightmares. "Almost done. Just stay still for me. Almost done." When the last one snapped free, she didn't move her arms immediately. They'd been in that position long enough that the muscles had locked. He watched her face cycle through the first wave of returning circulation, that particular expression between relief and agony, and said nothing. There was nothing to say. He got her arms free gently, supporting them as they came forward, and she made a sound that wasn't quite a cry, more like a breath that had been waiting a long time. He took off his jacket without deliberating about it, pulled the outer layer, the riding leather, and then the fleece liner underneath, and wrapped the fleece around her, tucking it under her bare feet. She weighed almost nothing. He could feel how cold she was through the fabric, a seeping cold that spoke of hours, not minutes. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment with those enormous dark eyes, assessing. He recognized that look. He'd seen it on men who'd been in bad places for a long time, men who had learned that trust was a thing you spent carefully because there was never enough of it. "Lena," she said. "Okay, Lena." Ray stood with her in his arms, his back protesting the angle, the cold hitting him now without the jacket. "I'm going to get you somewhere warm. Is that okay?" She didn't answer, but she turned her face into the fleece and stopped flinching. He carried her back to the road. The Harley was not built for 2 passengers. It especially was not built for a small child who couldn't hold on under her own power. Ray sat her on the tank in front of him, held between his arms, her back against his chest, and rewrapped as much of the fleece as he could reach around both of them. He kept his left hand on the handlebar, and his right arm braced across her body. She was shaking, deep, involuntary shaking, the full-body tremor of someone whose core temperature had dropped past the point where muscles could operate normally. He needed heat. He needed it in the next 20 minutes, or the shaking would stop, and that would be worse. He had a choice to make. Kettrick Falls was behind him. 3 hours at highway speed, longer at the careful pace he'd have to keep with a child on the tank. Harlan Creek was an hour and a half ahead, maybe, assuming road conditions held. He didn't know what was in Harlan Creek. He didn't know what was in either direction in terms of medical care. What he did know, because he had the kind of mind that cataloged things whether he wanted it to or not, was that he'd passed a mailbox on a fire road turnoff about 8 miles back. A mailbox at a fire road turnoff, this far from town, meant either a hunting cabin or a homestead. And a homestead this isolated meant someone who'd chosen to live far enough from society that they'd learned to handle things themselves. It was a gamble, but Lena's fingers, when he touched them while cutting the zip ties, had been the temperature of the ground she'd been sitting on. He turned the bike around and rode back east. The fire road was unmarked and unpaved, cutting between the tree trunks at an angle that required him to drop to walking speed. The Harley's suspension was not made for this surface. The front wheel bucked and jarred over frozen ruts, and Ray absorbed every impact through his spine, keeping his arm rigid across Lena's chest. She hadn't spoken since they'd started riding. He could feel her breathing against his forearm, shallow but present. The fire road opened after a mile and a half into a clearing, and at the far end of it sat a house. It was a modest structure, 2 stories, timber frame, with a wood stove chimney pushing a thin thread of smoke up into the dark sky. A generator shed on the left side, a truck in the yard, an older model F250 with snow chains already mounted on the rear tires. A single light burning in a downstairs window, the warm amber kind that came from inside rather than overhead. Someone was home and awake. Ray pulled up to the front of the house and killed the engine. He didn't announce himself, just got off the bike with Lena held against his chest and walked to the door and knocked. 3 seconds. Then the interior light shifted and he heard footsteps, deliberate, unhurried. And then the door opened 4 inches on a security chain and a woman looked at him through the gap. She was perhaps 60, compact, with the kind of posture that suggested she'd spent significant time in environments where relaxing your posture got people killed. Her gray hair was cut close to her head. She wore a flannel shirt over what looked like surgical scrubs, and she was holding a flashlight in her right hand with the easy familiarity of someone who'd carried it the same way for decades. Her eyes went immediately from Ray's face to the bundle in his arms. "Found her on 31, Ray said. "Tied to a tree. Exposure. She needs warmth and somebody who knows what they're doing." There was a pause of approximately 1 second. Then the woman unhooked the chain and opened the door all the way. "Get her inside," she said. "Take your boots off first." Her name was Evelyn Ashcombe, and she had been a combat medic with the 75th Ranger Regiment for 11 years before a roadside device in Kandahar took most of the hearing in her left ear and all of her interest in following orders from people who'd never been shot at. She'd been living in the Cascade foothills for 9 years. She grew her own vegetables, maintained her own generator, and treated the occasional injured hunter or lost hiker who stumbled across her property because the nearest hospital was 2 hours away and she hadn't lost the habit of being useful. She told Ray none of this that first night. He pieced it together over the next hours from context and observation. What she did in the first 20 minutes was move with the particular efficiency of a person who had made consequential decisions under bad conditions many times before and had stopped being frightened of them. She got Lena onto the couch nearest the wood stove, already burning hot, and began the assessment. Temperature, pulse, circulation in the extremities. She cut the fleece liner away gently, and then she stopped. Ray was standing by the window. He watched her face change. It wasn't a dramatic change. Evelyn Ashcombe wasn't someone who let things register dramatically. It was a very subtle shift, a slight slowing of her hands, a controlled stillness around her eyes. The expression of someone who has just seen something they expected not to see and is taking a moment to organize what it means before proceeding. "Could you put water on?" she said to Ray. Not a question. He went to the kitchen, found the kettle, filled it, put it on the gas burner and turned it to high. And from the kitchen, through the half-open door, he watched Evelyn work with careful hands and a face that had gone very quiet. The dress, the thin, impractical cotton dress, came off last. Once Lena's core temperature had been addressed with blankets and warm compresses to the major vessels at wrists, neck, and groin. What was underneath it was what had changed Evelyn's face. The bruising was old and new simultaneously. That was the first thing. Some of it was the yellow-green of wounds weeks into healing. Some of it was the deep purple-red of something more recent. Within the last week, Ray estimated, based on the color staging. The pattern wasn't random. It was never random. He knew enough about violence to know that random impact produced random patterns. Falls, accidents, the chaos of ordinary childhood. This was concentrated, methodical. It occupied specific geography on the child's body in a way that suggested deliberate placement, careful application. The kind of bruising that came from someone who had thought about what they were doing while they were doing it. And then there were the scars. 3 of them, on the child's left upper arm, circular, perfectly shaped, raised against the skin, the particular pearl white of fully healed burn tissue. Ray had seen that shape before, the diameter of a cigarette cherry, pressed into skin long enough to leave a permanent mark. Lena was watching him from the couch. Not Evelyn. Him. The child's eyes found his from across the room and held them, and in them Ray saw something that he recognized in a way that had nothing to do with reason. It was the particular expression of a person who has survived by learning exactly how much to reveal and how much to conceal, who has turned threat assessment into the most fundamental instinct of their existence. She was watching to see if the discovery of those marks would make him leave. Ray crossed the room and sat down on the floor beside the couch, so his eye level was below hers. "You're safe here," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "You don't know that," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. She was 7 years old, he found that out later, would be surprised by it, had assumed she was older from something in the way she held herself. And she spoke with the precise diction of a child who had been very carefully taught to perform normalcy for strangers. "No," Ray said. "You're right, but I'm going to try to make it true." Evelyn came in from the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea and said nothing. She handed one to Ray, set the other within Lena's reach, and sat down in the armchair across from them, and the 3 of them existed in that configuration for a while. The wood stove pushing heat into the room, the pine outside shuddering in the wind, the dark weight of everything that had not yet been said pressing against all 3 of them equally. "Where do you live, honey?" Evelyn asked, eventually. Quiet, careful. Lena was quiet for a long time. Then, "Harlan Creek." Ray looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. "Is there someone we should call?" Evelyn said. "Someone you live with?" The child's face went through a change that was too controlled for a 7-year-old. It went smooth and uninformative, the way a curtain gets drawn. "She'll say it was an accident," Lena said. "Who will?" Evelyn said. Lena pulled the blanket higher. "Vivian." Neither of them pressed her. Evelyn had enough experience to know when pressing closed doors instead of opening them. Ray was simply sitting with something that had moved through his chest when the child spoke that name. A recognition he couldn't fully articulate. The sense of a very specific kind of danger, the kind that didn't announce itself. It was past 3 in the morning. Evelyn made up the couch as a proper bed with pillows and the thick woolen blanket from the closet, and Lena was asleep within minutes. The sudden deep sleep of extreme physical exhaustion, her hands curled under her chin. She looked impossibly small. Ray sat at Evelyn's kitchen table with both hands around a mug that had gone cold and said nothing for a while. "You need to take her to the county sheriff in the morning," Evelyn said. She was sitting across from him, drinking her own tea, watching him with the steady attention of someone running assessments. "I know," Ray said. "Those burns on her arm are at least a year old, possibly 2. Whoever's been doing this has been doing this for a long time." "I know. Which means someone has already seen her. Teachers, doctors, someone has already had a reason to ask and didn't." Ray looked up. Evelyn held his gaze. "I'm not saying don't try. I'm saying be ready for what try looks like in a situation like this." He nodded slowly. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ray Mercer." A pause. "You're not from here." "No." "You've got a record," she said. "Not an accusation. Just a read, the way someone who'd spent years assessing strangers in the field made reads." "Yes." "What kind?" "Assault. 11 years back, bar fight, did 18 months. Evelyn took a sip of tea. "Clean since?" "Yeah." "Then you walked into the worst possible situation for someone like you," she said. "A vulnerable child, an unknown guardian, a small town where everyone probably knows everyone's business. And now your fingerprints are all over a missing child situation." "I know," Ray said for the 3rd time. "And you're still sitting here." He looked down at the cold mug. Outside, the wind moved through the firs, a low, sustained moan. Somewhere in the back of the house, a pipe settled with a metallic click. "She asked me not to take her back," he said, quietly, "before she fell asleep. She asked me. She said, 'Don't take me back to Vivian.' Those exact words." He paused. "She's 7 years old." Evelyn was quiet. "Sophie would have been 9, he said, "in March." There it was. He hadn't meant to say it. It came out the way things came out when you'd been on the road alone for 11 days, and your resistance had been worn down to nothing. Evelyn didn't say she was sorry. He appreciated that. She looked at him for a moment with something that was neither pity nor judgment, then said, "Then we figure out the morning together." He nodded. "But Ray." She waited until he looked at her. "Whoever this Vivian is, if she's in Harlan Creek and Lena's been there long enough that the burns have time to fully scar, she has roots there. Community. The kind of woman who ties a child to a tree in the woods and calls it something else has spent years building something that nobody can see through from the outside. You understand what I'm saying?" He did. "You go at this the wrong way," Evelyn said, "and you hand her exactly the weapon she needs. An ex-con biker who showed up with the missing kid in the middle of the night." The fire in the wood stove shifted and collapsed into itself with a sound like a quiet exhale. Ray set down the mug and said nothing, but his hands on the table were very still, and his eyes had gone to the middle distance, to whatever calculation was happening behind them. Evelyn watched that calculation take place in silence, and she didn't interrupt it because she was smart enough to recognize the difference between a man deciding whether to do something reckless and a man deciding how to do something necessary. They were very different things. At just past 4 in the morning, Lena made a sound from the other room. Not a scream, just a short, sharp intake of breath, the punctuation of a bad dream. Ray was on his feet before he'd decided to be. He crossed to the doorway and looked in. She was still asleep. Her face had gone tense for a moment and then released again, the dream passing through without fully waking her. He stood in the doorway for a while, watching her breathe. Then he went back to the kitchen table and sat down. Evelyn had refilled his mug without being asked, and the tea was hot, and outside the temperature was still dropping, and somewhere on the road toward Harlan Creek a woman named Vivian was sleeping without any concern that the child she'd tied to a tree might have been found by someone who wasn't going to let it go quietly. Ray wrapped both hands around the hot mug and looked at the steam. In the morning, he was going to drive into Harlan Creek and find out who Vivian Mercerfield was. He was going to ask careful questions in ordinary places, diners, gas stations, the kind of public spaces where people talked because talking was what people did. He was going to be unremarkable. He was going to control every impulse he had because Evelyn was right. He was the worst possible person to be the one doing this, which meant he had to be better than he actually was. What he didn't know yet, what he had no way of knowing at 4 in the morning in a stranger's kitchen in the frozen Cascade foothills, was that Vivian Mercerfield was already 3 moves ahead of him. He didn't know that she'd reported Lena missing 6 hours ago, weeping into a phone for a deputy sheriff who'd known her for 15 years and already had search parties coordinating in the wrong direction. He didn't know that the missing person description she'd provided included a note, careful, gentle, the kind of detail that seemed helpful and was therefore believed, about Lena's history of running away, about the child's difficult attachment issues, about the unfortunate prior incident with a man she'd met at a gas station. He didn't know any of that yet. He knew only that Lena was breathing in the next room and the fire was burning, and somewhere just past the edge of what he could see from this kitchen window, a highway ran east toward a town where something very wrong had been given a very respectable face for a very long time. He'd been riding for 11 months trying to leave the worst thing that had ever happened to him. He'd stopped at the right tree on the right night on the right empty highway, and the worst thing that had ever happened to him had nothing to do with what came next. Morning came gray and windless, the sky the pale pewter of a dead fire. Lena was awake before either of the adults, sitting cross-legged on the couch with the woolly blanket around her shoulders, watching the door. When Ray came in from the kitchen with a bowl of oatmeal Evelyn had made, she tracked him with those dark eyes, that calculating, careful gaze, and waited. He set the bowl on the side table and sat in Evelyn's armchair, keeping the space between them, not crowding. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Better." A pause. "My arms hurt." "That'll pass. The circulation coming back." She looked at the oatmeal, then at him. "Are you going to call someone?" Ray leaned forward, elbows on knees. He thought about lying to her, chose not to. "I have to figure out the right thing to do, Lena. I want to be honest with you about that." She absorbed this. "The police will take me back to Vivian." "Maybe not." "They always do." Her voice was matter of fact. utterly without self-pity, which was somehow worse than crying would have been. She explains things, and they believe her. She's very good at explaining things. Ray said nothing. She's not my mom, Lena said. My mom died when I was 3. Vivian's my guardian. She took me in because the county needed someone, and she was... The child paused, chose the word with precision. Available. Do you have any other family? Something moved across Lena's face. Quick, contained. My Uncle Grant, but Vivian told everyone he's a bad person. She looked at her hands. He came to the school once. He tried to talk to me. The principal called Vivian, and Vivian called the police, and they made him leave, and they said he was disturbing and dangerous. Ray sat very still. Was he? Ray asked. Lena shook her head slowly. Cried, she said. I saw him through the window before the police came. He was just standing by the fence, and when they told him to go, he cried. Outside, a blue jay landed on the windowsill, studied the scene for 2 seconds, and launched itself back into the trees. And a sister, Lena said, quieter now. I have a sister. Brielle. She's older. She got out when she was 16. Vivian let her go because she was too old and because Brielle fought back. The ghost of something complicated crossed Lena's face. I think Brielle doesn't know where I am. I think Vivian made sure of that. Ray looked at her. A 7-year-old accounting for her own situation with the systematic precision of someone who had spent years trying to understand a maze she was trapped inside. You're very smart, he said. I know, she said, simply. No vanity in it, just acknowledgement. It hasn't helped much. He held her gaze. She held his. I'm going to go into town today, he said. I'm not going to take you with me. You're going to stay here with Evelyn, and you're going to eat that oatmeal, and you're going to be safe. Do you understand? A pause. How do I know you'll come back? The question landed exactly where it was aimed. You don't, Ray said. But I'm going to. Lena picked up the oatmeal. He took that as the only answer he was going to get, went back to the kitchen, and told Evelyn what the child had said. Evelyn listened without interrupting, her arms folded, her face its usual careful neutral. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she went to a cabinet beside the refrigerator, unlocked it with a key from her pocket, and took out a small voice recorder and set it on the table. When you talk to her today, Evelyn said, get her saying it on tape. Her own words, her own account. Children's testimony is heavily discounted, but a continuous, unprompted, detailed account recorded before she's been coached is harder to dismiss. Not impossible, but harder. Ray looked at the recorder, then at Evelyn. You've been here before, he said. Not exactly here, she said, but somewhere close enough. She pushed the recorder across the table. He picked it up, looked at it for a moment, and put it in his jacket pocket. He went outside to the bike, saddled up in the gray morning light, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The cold was still absolute, breath crystallizing white, frost on the Harley's tank catching the pale light. He pulled on the balaclava and his gloves and looked out toward the fire road and the highway beyond it. Harlan Creek was an hour east. Whatever was waiting for him there had been building for years, carefully, in the dark. He started the Harley and rode. The engine's growl rolled back through the frozen trees and then faded, swallowed by the distance, until the only sound left in the clearing was the wood stove ticking inside the house, and the wind coming down off the mountain, and the small sound of a child eating oatmeal in a stranger's living room, calculating whether the man who'd found her in the dark was the same as every other adult she'd ever known. She had been wrong about people before. She had learned, the hard way, that hope was the most dangerous thing she was capable of. And yet, she ate the oatmeal. She watched the door. She waited. Ray hit the highway and turned east, and the gray morning opened up before him. 2 lanes of empty road running between walls of dark pine, no traffic, no visible sky, just the vanishing point of the highway dissolving into the distance like a question that hadn't been asked yet. 30 miles out, the trees thinned. 40 miles out, a gas station appeared on the right, a neon open sign doing its work against the pewter light. Ray pulled in, filled the tank, went inside. The attendant was a man in his 50s with the particular weathered quality of someone who'd spent most of his life in cold places. He barely looked up, You know a woman named Vivian Mercerfield? Ray asked, putting cash on the counter. Lives around here? The attendant looked up then. A specific kind of look. Not suspicious exactly, but recalibrating. Sure, he said. Everybody knows Vivian. A short pause. Why? Just heard the name, Ray said. Easy, unremarkable. The attendant bagged Ray's coffee and granola bar without breaking eye contact. She's the one that organizes the food drive every year, sits on the school board. Her missing kid's been all over the scanner this morning. You see anything weird out on 31? Ray kept his expression neutral. What kind of weird? Little girl, 8-year-old. They said she wandered off. The attendant pushed the bag across the counter. His voice had an edge now that wasn't quite there before. The edge of a small town closing ranks around something it believed in. Vivian's torn up about it. Real tragedy. That woman has done so much for this community. Ray picked up his coffee. Sounds like it, he said. He got back on the bike and sat in the parking lot for a moment, engine idling, the hot coffee cup cradled in his left hand. She'd already called it in, already shaped the narrative. 8 hours, give or take, from tying a child to a tree in the frozen dark. And Vivian Mercerfield had already repositioned herself as the devastated guardian, the community pillar, the woman to whom the tragedy was happening. And Harlan Creek believed her. Ray sat there in the gray morning light with cold coffee and a voice recorder in his jacket pocket, and the weight of 11 months of silence sitting in his sternum. And he thought about the gas station attendant's face when he said Vivian's name, the instinctive softening, the automatic loyalty, the absolute certainty that whatever story this woman had told was the correct one. He thought about Lena's voice saying, "She's very good at explaining things." He finished the coffee, crushed the cup, started the bike. The Harley's engine found its rhythm, that low, sustained growl that had been the only constant thing in his life for the better part of a year. And Ray Mercer rode east toward Harlan Creek, toward a woman he hadn't met in a town that already had a version of this story. And he understood with cold clarity that the first thing he needed to find wasn't evidence. The first thing he needed to find was Grant Holloway. Because a man the system had already written off once was going to recognize another one when they met. And together, two broken, discredited men with no standing and no resources and no one in their corner, they were going to have to build something airtight enough to break through a wall of perfect reputation and institutional trust and decade-old goodwill, in a place where everyone already knew the answer before anyone asked the question. Simple enough. He crossed the Harlan Creek town line at 9:47 in the morning. The sign was weathered, the black paint faded. Population 1,847. Home of the Harlan Creek Winter Market, 3 years running. The town looked exactly like what it was. Neat, quiet. The kind of place where people looked out for each other, which was either the best thing or the worst thing a place could be, depending on what it had decided to look out for. Ray parked on Main Street outside a diner called Kettle and Pine and killed the engine. Through the diner window, he could see people inside. Morning regulars, coffee cups, the comfortable insulation of a community that trusted itself. A television mounted near the ceiling was tuned to local news, and on it, filling the screen with the kind of composed, photogenic grief that Ray had already begun to understand was a performance, was a woman he had never seen before in his life. But he knew her. He knew her the way you knew certain kinds of danger, not by having met it, but by having survived something that rhymed with it. She was perhaps 45, well-dressed in the understated way of someone who understood that respectability was a costume. Dark hair, careful makeup, eyes that projected the exact correct intensity of anguish. She was speaking to a reporter, and while Ray couldn't hear the words through the glass, he didn't need to. The caption beneath her read, "Vivian Mercerfield, Guardian, Lena Cross. Cross. Age 7, missing since last night." The woman on the screen pressed one perfectly manicured hand to her chest, and her eyes filled, and the reporter leaned toward her with the practiced sympathy of someone who had no reason to doubt a single thing he was hearing. Ray sat on the Harley with his gloves in his hands and his engine cooling beneath him and looked through the diner window at the woman on the screen, and something went very cold in him. Not the freezing night temperature cold, not the cold of grief, but the particular cold that came before clarity. He knew one thing now that he hadn't known an hour ago. This was not a woman who had snapped. This was not a guardian who had lost control or made a terrible mistake or failed in some human, understandable way. This was a woman who had called the police 8 hours after tying a child to a tree in the frozen dark, and then sat in front of a news camera with exactly the right amount of tears and the exactly right amount of composure, and performed devastation for an audience that never once considered doubting her. This was something that had been practiced. And somewhere in this town, in a file cabinet or a courthouse or a school records room, there was the paper trail of every time it had worked before. He put his gloves back on. He went into the diner. He ordered coffee he didn't need, and he sat at the counter, and he listened to the people around him talk about Vivian Mercerfield and the missing child with the absolute, unquestioned faith of a community that had never been given any reason to look underneath the surface of the thing it had decided to trust. And he thought about Grant Holloway, standing by a school fence, crying, while they told him to go. The coffee was bad, and the diner was warm, and outside the gray morning was turning grayer. And Ray Mercer sat very still at the counter of Kettle and Pine and understood, with the total clarity of a man who had nothing left to lose, that somewhere between the moment he'd found Lena tied to that tree and the moment Vivian Mercerfield appeared on that television screen, his exile had ended. He just didn't know yet that by the end of the week there would be a warrant for his arrest. And he couldn't know, that in the alley behind the diner, 20 feet from where he sat, a man in a stained canvas jacket, with the look of someone who'd been sleeping in his truck all winter, was watching the same news broadcast on a cracked phone screen. And when Vivian's face appeared, his hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. Grant Holloway hadn't slept in 36 hours, and he was 3 days away from doing something that would either save Lena or destroy the last chance either of them had. Grant Holloway looked like a man who had been fighting a war alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have anyone standing next to him. Ray found him in the alley behind Kettle and Pine, exactly where the instinct said he'd be. Backed against the brick wall beside a dumpster, phone in one hand, the other hand pressed flat against the cold brick like he needed something solid to hold himself upright. He was maybe 40, but he wore it like 55. Canvas jacket, unwashed. Work boots with the left sole separating from the upper, wrapped with electrical tape. 3 days of beard. Eyes that had the particular quality of someone who hadn't slept enough in so long that exhaustion had stopped being a condition and become a permanent feature of the landscape. When Ray turned the corner into the alley, Grant's whole body torqued sideways, fight or flight firing before reason caught up, and his right hand dropped to his jacket pocket with a reflex that Ray recognized. "Easy," Ray said. He kept his hands visible, away from his body. "I'm not from here." Grant stared at him. His breathing was audible in the cold air. "Who are you?" "Someone who found a little girl on Route 31 last night," Ray said, "tied to a tree." The change in Grant Holloway's face was not subtle. The color left it entirely, replaced by something between devastation and fury that took several seconds to stabilize into a workable expression. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at the phone in his hand, at Vivian's face still frozen on the screen, and then back at Ray. "She's alive," Ray said, flat, immediate, because he could see the man going somewhere dark and needed to pull him back. "She's safe. She's not hurt. Not in the way you're thinking." Grant's hand came up and covered his mouth. He made no sound. His eyes went bright in a way that had nothing to do with anything except the particular reflex of a man who'd been carrying worst-case scenarios for a very long time, suddenly getting a different answer than the one he'd been bracing for. Ray waited. "Where is she?" Grant said when he had enough voice to say it. "Somewhere safe, off the grid, with someone I trust." Grant's eyes sharpened, the grief cycling back into wariness. "Why should I trust you?" "You probably shouldn't," Ray said. "Not yet, but you're standing in an alley watching Vivian Mercerfield cry on the news while you're the only person in this town who knows she's lying, and I'm the only person who's going to believe you. So," he paused, "you want to keep standing here, or you want to get somewhere we can talk?" Grant looked at him for a long moment. Behind them, through the diner wall, came the muffled sound of morning conversation, the particular hum of ordinary life continuing without interruption. Out on Main Street, a patrol car rolled past at walking speed, the deputy inside scanning the sidewalks, doing his part in a search that was pointed entirely in the wrong direction. Grant watched the patrol car pass. Then he looked back at Ray. "There's a place," he said. The place was a storage unit on the industrial edge of town, past the lumber yard, down a gravel access road that hadn't been properly maintained since the logging operation that once fed it had closed. Grant had been living in it for 6 weeks. Not officially living. Officially, he had an address at a rooming house on Birch Street. But the rooming house had thin walls and a landlord who asked questions, and what Grant had been doing for the past 4 months required a different kind of space. Ray followed him on the bike, keeping distance, watching the rear view. Nobody followed. The patrol car had continued up Main Street and turned toward the school, where presumably the search was being coordinated with the beautiful, organized efficiency that Vivian Mercerfield's involvement always seemed to produce. The storage unit was a 10 by 20 steel box at the end of a row of identical units, padlocked with a heavy-duty master lock that looked brand new. Inside, a sleeping bag on a folding cot, a camp stove, a folding table covered entirely with paper, photographs, printouts, handwritten notes, newspaper clippings held with tape and sticky pins to a sheet of corkboard propped against the back wall, a battery-powered lantern throwing yellow light against steel walls. Ray stood in the doorway and looked at the corkboard. He had known, intellectually, from everything Lena had told him and from the particular quality of those cigarette scars on her arm, that whatever Vivian Mercerfield had been doing had been happening for a long time. But seeing it mapped, seeing the physical geography of years of effort spent trying to make someone believe something nobody would believe, produced a specific kind of weight that knowledge alone didn't carry. Grant had been at this for 4 years. "Sit down," Grant said. He was pulling the cot out from the wall to make room, his movements quick and economical, the efficiency of someone who'd spent a long time in a small space. Ray sat on a plastic crate. He looked at the corkboard. He looked at Grant Holloway's hands as the man pulled a folder from beneath the table. The hands were shaking slightly, not from cold. "You said she's not hurt," Grant said, "in the way I was thinking." He opened the folder, didn't look at it, looked at Ray. "What way is she hurt?" Ray told him. All of it. The bruising, the burns, the temperature, the zip ties, the way she'd spoken about Vivian, the calm, precise, terrible way a 7-year-old had accounted for her own imprisonment. Grant listened without speaking. His jaw worked. That was the only visible sign. When Ray finished, Grant reached into the folder and laid a photograph on the table between them. A school photograph, the kind with the fake blue gradient background, of a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, dressed neatly, hair combed. Smiling the performance smile that children develop when they've learned that smiling is required in certain contexts regardless of internal state. "That's from her first year with Vivian," Grant said. "Look at her left arm." The photograph was candid, taken at an angle that suggested the school had no idea it was being taken. Someone had photographed the official school photo while it was being shot. The angle caught Lena's arm as she turned slightly. At the edge of the short sleeve, barely visible, a crescent of discoloration. "I tried to take that to the deputy," Grant said. His voice had gone flat. "Dale Corrigan. He's been the county deputy for 20 years. He knows Vivian since she moved here 12 years ago." He looked at the photograph and he said. Grant stopped, picked up the photograph, set it down again. He said Vivian had already mentioned that Lena bruised easily, mentioned it preemptively before I even came in. She'd gone to him first to explain that her ward had a platelet condition. Ray said nothing. "There is no platelet condition," Grant said. "I have Lena's medical records from before she came into Vivian's custody. She was a healthy kid, normal blood work. Nothing." He pulled another sheet from the folder. "I filed a formal complaint with Child Protective Services 14 months ago. The caseworker assigned was a woman named Paula Reese. Reese visited Vivian's home twice. Both times she wrote that the home was immaculate, the child appeared healthy, and the guardian was exceptionally engaged." He set the sheet down. "I have a recording of Lena from 8 months ago. She was at the park. I was in my truck, across the street. She didn't know I was watching. She was sitting on a bench alone while the other kids played. She didn't play, she just sat there and watched them." He paused. "For an hour. A 6-year-old sitting alone on a bench for an hour, completely still, while 15 other kids ran around 10 feet away." Ray looked at the corkboard, the years of it, the futility of it organized into careful rows. What happened to your credibility? Ray asked. Direct, because it needed to be asked, and Grant already knew it was the relevant question. Grant sat back. He had the look of a man who had answered this enough times that the shame of it had calcified into something harder. I did 3 years for aggravated assault, 2018. Man I hit deserved it. He was hurting someone, but the law doesn't care about the reason, only the act. A pause. When I got out, my sister was already dead. Vivian already had custody of both girls. Brielle was 15 and fighting everything. Lena was 3 years old, and I was a convicted felon with no stable income trying to contest a custody arrangement that a judge had already approved for a guardian with an immaculate record and a clean home and a town full of character witnesses. His eyes were steady. I lost. Obviously I lost, and then I became the dangerous, unstable uncle. And every time I came near Lena after that, Vivian made sure someone official was watching. You said both girls, Ray said. Lena mentioned a sister. Brielle. Brielle got out at 16. She's 22 now. She's in Portland. Grant looked at his hands. She left because she had to. Vivian let her go because Brielle fought back in ways that couldn't be covered up anymore. Not violence, just refusal. Absolute refusal. But Brielle was old enough to leave, and Lena, he stopped. Lena was too small, and Brielle has been trying to find her for 2 years. Vivian moved twice, changed Lena's school once, filed paperwork that made the records harder to access. Ray looked at him. Does Brielle know about any of this? I've tried to contact her. She blocked me. A beat. She thinks I abandoned Lena. She thinks I gave up. Because that's what Vivian told her. Ray sat with that for a moment. 3 people who loved the same child, separated from each other by a woman who understood, with the precision of a surgeon, exactly which threads to cut and in what order to leave a person isolated. I need to know one thing, Ray said. Grant met his eyes. If I bring Lena here, back toward this town, back within range of whatever Vivian has built, is there anything in what you've collected that is airtight? Ray held the other man's gaze. Not persuasive, not compelling, airtight. Grant was quiet for a long moment. Not alone, he said. None of it alone. But together? Another pause. Grant looked at the corkboard, at 4 years of careful, patient, lonely documentation. Maybe, he said. Maybe together. Ray nodded. He stood up, looked at the corkboard one more time, and said, I need to make a call. Grant looked at him. To who? People I've been avoiding for 11 months, Ray said. He went outside to make it. The gravel lot in front of the storage units was empty, the lumber yard beyond it silent in the mid-morning cold. Ray stood beside the Harley and looked at his phone for longer than he needed to. The contact was still there. He hadn't deleted it, which he told himself was oversight, but probably wasn't. Dutch. Valhalla, MC. He pressed call before he could talk himself out of it. It rang 4 times. Then a voice, deep, unhurried, the vocal equivalent of something that had been forged under pressure and was no longer particularly impressed by anything. Mercer. Not a question, not a greeting, just acknowledgement, with 11 months of silence behind it. Dutch, Ray said. You alive? Yeah. A pause, the sound of background noise. A garage, probably. Metal on metal. Someone else's work continuing around the immovable fact of this conversation. You writing? Dutch asked. I'm in trouble, Ray said. Another pause. What kind? The kind I can't walk away from. Ray looked out at the gray morning, at the tree line beyond the lumber yard, at the nothing that existed past it for miles in every direction. There's a kid, 7 years old. She was tied to a tree on Route 31 last night. I've got her somewhere safe for now, but the guardian who did it has already reported her missing and has half the county looking in the wrong direction, and I've got a record and no standing, and I need— Where are you? Dutch said. Pacific Northwest, Harlan Creek, small logging town about 2 hours east of— I know where Harlan Creek is. A pause. How bad is the record situation? Bad enough. Assault. 18 months served. How long you been there? Since this morning. Anybody see you with the kid? One person. She's solid. Dutch was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding, the quiet of someone who'd already decided and was organizing the execution. Ray knew the difference. Don't go near the kid's guardian, Dutch said. Don't go near the official investigation. Stay invisible until I get there. Dutch. I said, stay invisible, Ray. The voice hadn't changed pitch or intensity. It didn't need to. You're 11 months gone. You show up in the middle of a missing kid case with a record and no explanation. You're not an asset. You're a liability. You understand me? Ray understood him. How long? Ray asked. Tomorrow morning. Maybe tonight if I push. There's more than just this, Ray said. When you get here, there's more. A beat. There always is, Dutch said, and ended the call. Ray stood in the cold for a moment with the phone in his hand. Somewhere in the town behind him, a search was being organized by a woman who already knew where Lena wasn't. Somewhere in a storage unit 20 feet away, a man who'd spent 4 years being disbelieved was sitting with the evidence of his own futility pinned to a corkboard. Somewhere off a fire road in the Cascades, a 7-year-old was eating oatmeal in a stranger's house and waiting to see if the man who found her would be like every other adult she'd ever known. He went back inside. The rest of that day happened in pieces. Ray drove out to Evelyn's in the mid-morning and spent 2 hours with Lena and the voice recorder sitting on the floor of the living room while Lena talked. He didn't ask leading questions, couldn't, wouldn't, understood that the integrity of what she said depended entirely on it coming from her without direction. He just asked open questions and listened, and Lena talked with the particular quality of a child who had been waiting for someone to actually want to hear her. She talked about the punishments. She called them that, punishments, with Vivian's vocabulary because Vivian had carefully taught her that the word for what happened was punishment, which implied that Lena had done something to cause it. She talked about the rules, which rooms she could enter, what times she was permitted to eat, the specific silence that was required during meals, the chart on the kitchen wall that tracked her compliance and whose columns had corresponding consequences. She talked about the way Vivian could be when other adults were present, warm, demonstrative, the laughing indulgence of an exceptional guardian, and the way she could be 40 minutes later when the door closed. Ray sat on the floor and listened. Evelyn sat in the kitchen doorway and listened. Neither of them said anything except when Lena paused and seemed to need confirmation that she was still allowed to keep talking. It took an hour and 40 minutes. When it was done, Lena looked tired in a very specific way. Not physically tired, but the tired of having set something down that had been very heavy. Ray clicked off the recorder and set it on the floor between them. "Thank you," he said. Lena looked at him. Then she lay down on the couch and turned her face to the back cushion. He took the recorder to the kitchen. Evelyn looked at him. He looked at her. "Is it enough?" he asked. Evelyn took a long breath. "It's detailed. It's unprompted. It's consistent in the way a coached story isn't." She paused. "A good advocate could do something with it." "That's a long way from airtight." "Yes," she said. "It is." He made the drive back to Harlan Creek in the early afternoon, spent an hour in the storage unit with Grant, going through the corkboard methodically. What was documented, what was corroborated, what was only Grant's testimony. The picture was better than Ray had expected and worse than he'd hoped. There were medical records showing a pattern of injury presentations over 3 years. Each one explained, each explanation accepted, but the pattern itself visible if you laid them all flat and looked at the whole. There were 2 signed statements from other parents who had, separately, noticed something wrong at school events and said nothing at the time but had later told Grant they'd been concerned. There were photographs. There were handwritten notes that Lena had somehow managed to pass to a classmate, which the classmate's mother had given to Grant in secret and which the classmate's mother had since refused to confirm, having received a visit from Vivian's attorney. Layer after layer of almost. Of evidence that reached toward the truth and fell just short of the proof. "Paula Reese," Ray said, "the caseworker. What about her? You said she visited twice. Both times wrote clean reports." Ray looked at the corkboard. "Did Vivian know Reese was coming?" Grant frowned. "The first visit was announced, standard procedure. Second was supposed to be unannounced, but..." He stopped. The report was still clean. Who knew about the second visit besides Reese? A silence. "The department," Grant said slowly. "The CPS regional office, and whoever they told." "Is there anyone at the regional office with a connection to Vivian?" Grant stared at him. Then he pulled out his phone and started scrolling. "Her annual gala," he said. "She throws it every December. Fundraiser for the youth center. I tried to get the guest list last year, couldn't." He stopped scrolling. "But there was a photograph in the Harlan Creek Courier from 3 years ago." He held out the phone. It was a social event photograph, the kind newspapers ran with captions full of names. Vivian at a long banquet table, beautifully dressed, laughing at something. Beside her, a man in a blazer identified in the caption as Regional Director, Cascade County Child and Family Services. Below that, a woman identified as Senior Case Supervisor, the title directly above Paula Reese's position in the department hierarchy. Ray looked at the photograph for a long time. "She built the wall before she needed it," he said. "That's what I've been trying to tell people for 4 years, Grant said. They sat with that for a while. Outside the storage unit, the wind picked up, running along the corrugated steel walls with a low, sustained whistle. The battery lantern flickered once and held. "There's someone coming," Ray said. "Tomorrow morning, maybe tonight. A man named Dutch Calloway. He's president of a motorcycle club, the Valhalla Brotherhood. They're clean. No criminal enterprise, no criminal record at the club level. They're people I trust." He stopped, amended it. "People I used to trust." Grant looked at him. "Used to?" "I left 11 months ago, without explaining. A beat. After my daughter died." Grant held his gaze for a moment. Then he looked down at the folder in his hands. He didn't say he was sorry. Ray appreciated that. "Why are you calling them in?" Grant asked. "Because I can't be the face of this. I walked into this town as an unknown ex-con who showed up the same night a kid went missing. If I'm the one pushing the investigation forward, Vivian turns me into the story. She's probably already working on it." Ray looked at the corkboard. "But if there's a group of people, visible, organized, present, standing behind the evidence, making it impossible for this to get buried quietly." "You think bikers showing up is going to make it harder to bury?" "I think 10 men with Harleys parked in front of the county building is a different conversation than one man with a record making a complaint." Grant thought about it. He didn't look convinced, but he looked less unconvinced than he had. "What do you need me to do tonight?" "Stay here. Stay invisible. Don't contact Vivian. Don't contact the police. Don't contact anyone." Ray stood up. "And if you have any way of reaching Brielle, Lena's sister, try again. She needs to know Lena is alive, and we might need her." Grant was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his phone. That evening, Ray ate at a counter in a different diner 3 miles outside of town, not Kettle and Pine, not anywhere on Main Street, and read the local news on his phone. Lena's disappearance was the dominant story. The coverage was sympathetic in the specific way coverage of Vivian was always sympathetic. The devoted guardian, the bewildered community, the inexplicable disappearance of a little girl from a loving home. There were quotes from neighbors, quotes from the school principal, quotes from Dale Corrigan, the deputy, who confirmed that all available resources were being deployed and that the community could trust that Vivian and Lena would be reunited soon. 3 days ago, the temperature on Route 31 had been 19 degrees Fahrenheit, and a 7-year-old had been barefoot and zip-tied to a pine tree in the dark. Ray paid for his coffee and drove back out to Evelyn's. Lena was awake when he got there, sitting at Evelyn's kitchen table with a glass of milk and a book. A children's illustrated atlas, something Evelyn had pulled from a shelf. She was looking at a map of South America with the same focused attention she applied to everything. She looked up when Ray came in. "Did you find him?" she asked. "My uncle." Ray sat down across from her. "Yeah," said. Something moved in her face. Quick, suppressed. "Is he okay?" "He's been worried about you," Ray said. "For a long time." Lena looked back at the atlas. She turned a page. "Vivian said he was dangerous," she said to the map. "She said he had a temper and that he couldn't take care of himself and that anyone who associated with him ended up in trouble." Ray waited. "She said it a lot," Lena said. "She said it to teachers. She said it to the deputy. She said it whenever someone mentioned him." She smoothed the page of the atlas. "She always said it like she was sad about it, like it was hard for her to have to say true things about a bad person." "What do you think?" Ray said. Lena considered. I think she was scared of him, she said. People who are really telling the truth about someone don't have to say it over and over. She looked up. They just say it once. Ray looked at this 7-year-old across the kitchen table. That's very smart, he said. I know, she said again. Without vanity. Just measurement. He stayed until she was asleep. Then he sat with Evelyn in the kitchen and they drank tea and didn't talk much. And around 11 o'clock, he rode back into town and checked into a motel on the highway. A 12-room place called the Mountain Rest, cash payment, no questions, and lay on the bed with his boots on and looked at the ceiling. Dutch would be here tomorrow, or tonight. And when Dutch arrived, the thing Ray had been doing alone would become something else, something with more weight behind it, more visibility, more risk of the wrong kind of attention. The Valhalla Brotherhood was not unknown in the Pacific Northwest. They had a history in this region that was complicated in certain places, uncomplicated in others. In Harlan Creek, they were almost certainly unknown, which was an advantage that would last exactly until they arrived on Main Street. He closed his eyes. He thought about Sophie. He let himself do it, which he didn't usually do because there was a reason he'd been on a highway for 11 months. He thought about her face when she laughed, that total physical laugh that took over her whole body. He thought about the purple backpack she'd insisted on, even though it had a broken zipper that he kept meaning to fix. He thought about the last time he'd seen her at his ex-wife's front door, her hand raised in a wave that was already turning away before she reached the top step, the unself-conscious farewell of a kid who assumed there would be plenty more. He put it away. He lay there in the cheap motel room with the highway noise outside and the smell of old carpet, and something slightly chemical in the heat that came from the baseboard units. And he thought about Lena's voice on the recorder and Grant Holloway's corkboard, and the photograph of Vivian at the banquet table with the case supervisor beside her. He thought about Paula Reese. He sat up. Paula Reese had made 2 visits to Vivian's home. Both times she'd written clean reports, but the second visit had been unannounced, or had been supposed to be. Someone had told Vivian, which meant either someone at the regional office had tipped her off, or Reese herself had. Ray turned that over. If Reese had tipped Vivian off, pre-visit, that suggested active complicity. That was one thing. But if Reese had made the unannounced visit genuinely unannounced and still written a clean report, that was different. That suggested something else. That suggested that whatever Vivian had built inside that house was so complete, so thoroughly prepared for inspection, that a trained caseworker walking in cold had seen exactly what she was supposed to see. Which meant there was a version of the house that existed for observation. A performance of normalcy so refined it could be activated at any moment. A journal, maybe. A deliberate record. The kind of documentation that looked, from the outside, like the careful notes of a concerned guardian managing a difficult child. The kind of thing you kept specifically so that if anyone ever looked, there would be something to look at that supported your story. He needed to see inside that house. He lay back down. He stared at the ceiling. The baseboard heater ticked. He was not going to do that tonight. He was going to stay invisible, the way Dutch had said. But staying invisible was a thing with a shelf life. The next morning arrived cold and flat. The sky the same sealed pewter as the day before. Ray was in the motel parking lot with coffee from the lobby machine when he heard them. He heard them before he saw them. That was always how it was with the Brotherhood. The sound arrived first. A low rolling thunder that built from nothing over the course of 30 seconds, growing and complexifying as the individual engines staggered their timing the way they did on a long highway run. Each bike's rhythm slightly offset from the others, so the collective sound became something textured and inevitable, like weather. They came down the highway from the west, 6 of them, riding in the loose, staggered formation that the Brotherhood used for road travel. Not performance, just practical spacing. Dark leathers. The Valhalla Brotherhood patch visible on each back as they passed. A silver longship on a black field. The text arched above and below in block letters designed to be legible from a distance. They pulled into the motel lot one by one, engines dropping from road register to idle, and then to silence in a sequence that took about 20 seconds and left behind it a quality of quiet that felt earned. Dutch Calloway got off his bike last. He was 58 years old, built like something structural. The kind of physical presence that didn't come from a gym, but from decades of actual labor and actual damage absorbed and processed. He had a gray and black beard that he kept close, and gray eyes that were never in a hurry, and a face that had been broken and reset so many times in its history that it had achieved a kind of rough permanence. He wore his leathers like they were a second skin that happened to be made of cowhide. No helmet. He'd made his choice about that long ago, and the choice had never been revisited. He walked across the parking lot to Ray and stopped. For a moment they just looked at each other. 11 months of silence between them, cold air moving between them, the distant sound of the highway behind them. Dutch looked at him for a long time, not searching, assessing, the way he always assessed, without drama and without apology. "You look like hell," Dutch said. "Yeah," Ray said. Dutch's eyes moved over him. The weight loss, the road-worn jacket, the particular quality of exhaustion that comes not from physical work, but from sustained internal weather. He didn't comment on any of it. "The others are Briggs, Novak, Teller, Hatch, and Wren," Dutch said. He turned slightly to indicate the 5 men standing by their bikes, each of them doing the brotherhood thing of existing with absolute stillness and taking up exactly as much space as they were actually standing in. No performance, no posturing. "You remember them." Ray did. Briggs was a former Army combat engineer who'd lost 2 fingers on his right hand in Fallujah and made up for it by being impossible to outthink. Novak was the quiet one, ex-Navy, compact, with the particular gift of disappearing into a scene so thoroughly that people stopped registering he was there. Teller was the youngest, maybe 35, who'd come to the Brotherhood via a different kind of damage, the domestic variety, which he'd survived, and which had left him with a low-level, permanent fury that he managed through discipline and proximity to people he respected. Hatch was the mechanic, the fixer, the one who solved problems with tools. Wren was Dutch's oldest friend, somewhere past 60, with a white braid down his back and a face that had absorbed so much of the world's nonsense that it had gone completely peaceful about it. Ray nodded to each of them in turn. Each of them nodded back. No words. Nothing to say until there was something to say. Dutch looked at him. "Tell me everything." They stood in the motel parking lot, and Ray told him. All of it, in order, from the headlight catching the shape on Route 31, to the storage unit, to the corkboard, to the photograph of the banquet table. Dutch listened without interrupting, which was how he always listened. Completely, with his full attention, not building his response while Ray was still talking. When Ray finished, Dutch was quiet for about 10 seconds. "The recorder," he said. "Where is it?" "At the safe house." "We need a copy of that recording somewhere Vivian can't get to." "Agreed." "The caseworker, Reese. She's either dirty or she's been played for years and doesn't know it." "I think played," Ray said. "My read." "Might be salvageable then." Ray looked at him. He hadn't considered that angle. "You want to turn Reese?" "I want to give her the chance to make a better decision than the one she's been making," Dutch said. "That's different from turning someone." Ray took that in. "What about the uncle?" Dutch said. "Solid, damaged. Credible if someone's willing to look at him with fresh eyes." "He'll need to make a statement to someone official, eventually. He knows that." "And the girl's sister? In Portland?" "Grant's been trying. She blocked him." Dutch pulled out his own phone. "Give me whatever contact information you have for her. I'll have someone reach out from a number she doesn't recognize." Ray gave him what Grant had given him. Dutch typed, sent a message somewhere, pocketed the phone. Then Dutch looked at Ray with those gray, unhurried eyes and said the thing that had been waiting to be said since the parking lot. "You left without a word," Dutch said. 11 months. Nobody knew if you were alive." Ray met his eyes. "I know." "That's not how it works." "I know." "You built something here, Ray. 11 years with this brotherhood. That's not nothing." "No." Ray looked down at his coffee cup. "It's not nothing." "Then you understand why I need you to not go dark again. Not in the middle of this." Ray looked up. "I won't." Dutch held his gaze for a moment longer, making sure of it. Then he nodded, once, and that was the end of that conversation and the beginning of the next one. "Here's the problem," Dutch said. "We pull into town 6 riders strong. People notice. Small town, missing kid, an ex-con already in the mix. We're going to draw attention from the deputy before we want to." I know. So we need a reason to be here that isn't this. Dutch looked at the motel. Briggs will handle that. He's good at establishing context. He paused. Meanwhile, you and I and Novak are going to go very carefully look at everything Grant Holloway has. Because if there's something on that corkboard that you missed, something that becomes the keystone when you put it with what the girl told you, we need to find it before Vivian has a chance to make her next move. Ray nodded. One more thing, Dutch said. That house. Ray looked at him. I know what you've been thinking about since last night, Dutch said. Not an accusation, just the flat read of someone who knew him. The risks are significant and are not zero and are outweighed if what we need is in there, Dutch said. But it doesn't happen without the full picture, and it doesn't happen without me knowing about it. Ray nodded. All right. Dutch looked at him for a moment, then, you did right by this kid, Ray. What you did on that road, that was the right thing. Ray said nothing. He looked at his coffee cup. Sophie would have, Dutch started. Don't, Ray said. Quiet. Final. Dutch stopped. He nodded. That, too, was the end of that. They were in the storage unit by 9 o'clock, Dutch and Novak and Ray standing in front of the corkboard while Grant watched from the cot with the particular wariness of a man who'd spent years being the only person in the room who believed what was on his walls. Novak moved along the corkboard without speaking. His eyes went over it in horizontal sweeps, methodical, then stopped at the CPS report section. He leaned in. These reports, he said. His voice was quiet and unhurried. The dates. Grant looked up. What about them? The second inspection was 11 months ago, Novak pointed without touching. Right after you filed the formal complaint. So the complaint triggered the inspection. Right. And the report came back clean. But here. Novak traced to a different section of the board. These photographs you took of Lena at the park, 2 weeks before the inspection. Yeah, to document. The bruising is visible in 3 of them, Novak said. On her arms, under the right sleeve. Clear enough. I know. That's what I... So when the caseworker showed up 11 months ago and wrote a clean report, Novak stopped, looked at Grant. Where were the bruises? The room went quiet. Grant stared at the corkboard, at the photographs, at the CPS dates. They were gone, he said slowly. 2 weeks between the photographs and the inspection. She had 2 weeks. Enough time for bruising to yellow and fade to nothing visible, Ray said. She knew, Dutch said, not loudly. She knew about the formal complaint. She knew inspection was coming. She had 2 weeks to let the marks heal, which meant someone had told her about the complaint before the inspection was scheduled, which meant someone at CPS or connected to CPS had flagged the complaint to her the moment it was filed, which meant Vivian Mercerfield had a contact inside the child welfare system who was actively feeding her intelligence, not passively failing to act, actively notifying. Grant looked at Dutch. Dutch looked at Ray. That's the keystone, Dutch said. And Ray thought, yes. And he thought, we need to be inside that house. And he thought, there's a journal in there, a black journal, and it's going to say exactly what we think it's going to say, and it's going to be the difference between almost and airtight. And then Grant's phone rang. Grant looked at it. His face changed. He looked at Ray. It's a Portland number, he said. One I don't recognize. Ray thought of the message Dutch had sent an hour ago. Answer it, he said. Grant answered. He said, hello. He listened. His hand tightened around the phone. He listened for 30 seconds, then said, very quietly, Brielle. And then said nothing else for a long time, just listened, and his face did something complicated and private that none of the men in the storage unit looked directly at. Eventually he said, Lena's alive. She's safe. Another silence. I know you did. I know. A pause. No. Listen to me. I need you to come here. There are people here who... He looked at Ray. People who are trying to help, but we need you. Can you come? He listened. Okay, he said. Okay, yes, okay. He ended the call. He set the phone down on the cot beside him. She's driving, Grant said. She'll be here tomorrow morning. Dutch nodded, turned back to the corkboard. And that was the moment. 7 hours before Ray Mercer broke into Vivian Mercerfield's house, that the situation became irreversible, because Dutch turned back to the corkboard and saw what none of them had looked at closely enough before. A newspaper clipping from 4 years ago, a small notice buried in the Harlan Creek Courier's community section. Vivian Mercerfield, appointed to the newly created position of Community Liaison to the Cascade County Department of Family Services, a formal, official, salaried bridge between Vivian's respectable life and the system they were trying to use against her. She wasn't just connected to the system. She was part of it. The newspaper clipping was 4 years old and small, the kind of community notice that nobody read twice, buried between an announcement about the Harlan Creek Winter Market and a notice about road closures on Route 9. 43 words. Vivian Mercerfield's name. The title? Community Liaison to the Cascade County Department of Family Services. A role described in the clipping as volunteer-based, community-focused, designed to strengthen the bridge between local families and county services. Dutch had it off the corkboard and in his hand before Grant finished processing what the expression on Dutch's face meant. "This position," Dutch said, his voice was very level. "What does it actually do?" Grant looked at the clipping. She presents it as advocacy. She goes to the regional office, meets with caseworkers, flags concerns from the community, sits in on planning sessions. He paused. She told the Courier she saw it as her way of giving back. "She has access to case files," Novak said. Not a question. Grant's face changed. Slowly, the way things changed in him. The processing visible, the implications arriving in sequence. "She would have access to the intake log," he said. "Not individual files, but the intake log would show every complaint filed under her liaison zone, which is Harlan Creek." "Which means," Ray said, "the day you filed your formal complaint against her, she knew about it." Grant sat down on the cot. The storage unit was silent. Outside, the wind picked up and moved along the corrugated walls with that low steel whistle, and the battery lantern threw its yellow light across 4 men and a corkboard and 4 years of careful documentation that had just revealed its own most devastating blind spot. "She built the oversight mechanism," Dutch said, "and then she stepped inside it." Nobody said anything, because there was nothing to say that added to what was already sitting in the room. Ray looked at the clipping in Dutch's hand. He thought about the photograph from the banquet. Vivian at the long table, laughing, the case supervisor beside her. He thought about Paula Reese's clean reports. He thought about Lena's voice saying she's very good at explaining things, in the flat, precise tone of a child who had learned that explanation and reality were 2 entirely different architectures. "How many kids has she had?" Ray said. Grant looked up. "Through the Guardian system. Before Lena. Before Brielle." Ray held his gaze. "How many?" A pause. Grant reached under the table and pulled out a second folder, thinner than the first. He opened it. "Brielle and Lena's mother died in 2017. Before that, I found records of 2 other placements. A boy named Marcus Devlin, placed with Vivian in 2013 for 14 months before she voluntarily relinquished custody, citing behavioral difficulties. And a girl, Caitlin Ware, placed in 2010 for 20 months. Same outcome. Voluntary relinquishment, behavioral concerns." He set the folder on the table. "I tried to locate both of them. Marcus is in the juvenile system in Spokane. Multiple placements, instability, pattern of self-destructive behavior. Caitlin, I couldn't find it all." The room absorbed that. 14 months, Dutch said. 20 months. Whatever she does, whatever the mechanism is, she has a window, when a child is useful to her or when the risk is manageable, and then she exits cleanly. "But Lena's been there 4 years, Ray said. "Lena has a compliant temperament," Grant said, voice hollow. "She learned early to be invisible, to manage herself. Vivian didn't need to relinquish. Lena was containable." He looked at his hands. "And I was discredited, which means Lena had no outside advocate pushing for her removal." Ray stood up. He needed to move. The storage unit was 12 feet wide, and he crossed it to the far wall and stood there with his back to the others for a moment, looking at the steel. He was thinking about a black journal. It existed. He was certain of it, not from evidence, but from the instinctive read of a pattern. A woman who had been doing this for 15 years with a level of deliberateness that required active documentation to maintain had a record of it somewhere. The kind of woman who had built a paper trail exonerating herself in advance. The platelet condition, the behavioral concerns, the clean home assessments, kept the other record somewhere no one would find it. The real record, the one that was for her alone. He turned back around. "I'm going into that house tonight." Dutch looked at him. "Not to confront her," Ray said. "She won't be there. She'll be at the community center tonight. Grant, is there something happening there?" Grant pulled out his phone, opened the Harlan Creek community calendar. "Emergency volunteer coordination," he said, "for the search. She organized it. Starts at 7. Listed until at least 10. 3 hours," Ray said. "The house will be empty. I go in, I find what we need, I come out." Dutch was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Novak. Novak gave nothing. "You understand," Dutch said, "that anything you find is inadmissible." "I'm not building a court case tonight," Ray said. "I'm finding the keystone. Once we know what it is and where it is, we find a legal way to get at it." He paused. "Or Brielle does when she gets here. She's family. She has standing." Dutch looked at him for the full weight of a moment. Then he said, "Novak goes with you." Novak didn't react. He'd already been going. He'd been going the moment Dutch said his name in the parking lot this morning. They spent the rest of the day in compartments. Briggs established the Brotherhood's cover, a group of riders passing through, stopping overnight at the mountain rest, spending money at local businesses. He was good at it, the way he was good at most logistical things. He understood that visibility required both presence and ordinariness, and that the specific ordinariness required was calibrated to place. Small logging town in the Pacific Northwest. You didn't go quiet, you went local. He took Teller and Hatch to the hardware store, to the gas station, to the diner on Main Street, and they sat at the counter and drank bad coffee and talked about road conditions and the price of diesel and listened to people talk about the missing child, which was all anyone in Harlan Creek was talking about. What Briggs heard at the diner counter, which he reported back at 4 o'clock, was this. The search had shifted direction. A man matching Ray's description had been seen at the gas station on Route 31 the morning after Lena's disappearance, asking about Vivian Mercerfield by name. The description had been shared with Deputy Corrigan. Corrigan had been asking around. Ray processed this without expression. "How specific is the description?" he asked. "Hair, jacket, bike," Briggs said. "No name." "Not yet," Dutch said. "No," Briggs said. "Not yet." Ray looked at Dutch. "I need to stay out of town until tonight." "You need to stay out of town indefinitely," Dutch said. "But tonight especially." Ray went back out to Evelyn's. He found Lena at the kitchen table with paper and colored pencils Evelyn had produced from somewhere, drawing. She looked up when he came in, assessed him briefly, went back to her drawing. Ray sat down across from her and looked at what she was making. A house, or what a house looked like in the architectural imagination of a 7-year-old. Blocky. Literal. A door, windows, a chimney. But the roof was unfinished and she'd drawn the windows without glass, the frames open to nothing. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Okay," she said, without inflection. She added a tree to the left side of the house, worked on its branches. "Evelyn taught me how to play gin rummy." "Did she beat you?" 3 times. A pause. "I won the 4th. Ray looked at the drawing. "I might have something for you," he said carefully. "Tomorrow. Maybe the day after." She didn't look up. "Your sister," he said. "Brielle." Lena's hand stopped moving on the paper. Just stopped, mid-stroke. She sat very still. "She's coming," Ray said. "She's driving. She'll be here tomorrow morning." Lena said nothing. Her hand was still on the paper. Ray could see the tendons in her small wrist, rigid. "Lena." She looked up. Her eyes were bright with something she was visibly, actively controlling. The reflex of a child who had learned that hope required containment because the cost of its failure was unbearable. "She's really coming?" Lena said. "Yes." "She's not." Vivian didn't. No, Ray said. She's safe. She's coming. Lena looked at the drawing. She picked up the pencil again. She drew a door on the house, a real one, solid, with a handle, something the house hadn't had before. Ray sat there for a while and watched her draw. At 6:45, Ray and Novak were parked on a fire road 2 blocks north of Vivian Mercerfield's house, engines off, lights off, sitting in the dark of a December evening with the temperature at 16 degrees and freezing rain just beginning to tick against the Harley's windscreen. They'd been in position for 20 minutes. Novak had a clear line of sight to the house's front windows through the bare trees, and for 20 minutes those windows had been lit. And then, at 6:48, the lights went off room by room in sequence, the particular sequencing of someone moving through a house and shutting it down behind them. The porch light stayed on. It was the kind of detail that spoke of practiced performance, the returning guardian who wanted her home to look welcoming. A car appeared in the driveway. Vivian's, a late model Volvo, sensible, respectable, backed out and turned toward Main Street, and its lights disappeared. Novak looked at Ray. Ray looked at Novak. They gave it 15 minutes. Novak spent them watching the street, the neighboring houses, the dog that appeared on the property to the east for 3 minutes, and then went back inside. He cataloged everything without narrating any of it. Ray sat with the cold and the rain and the particular quality of focus that came before something irreversible. Then Novak said, "Clear," and they moved. The house was a Victorian-era structure, well-maintained, painted gray with white trim, the kind of house that photographed beautifully. A wraparound porch, an established garden in the front dormant under the frost. A side door off the kitchen with a standard deadbolt that Novak handled in under 60 seconds with a tension wrench and a short pick in his left hand, unhurried, like a key he'd simply mislaid. Inside, the particular smell of a house that was kept, not merely clean, but performed, something floral beneath the neutral temperature. The absence of disorder in a way that said something other than cleanliness. The kind of interior that appeared in inspection reports as immaculate. Novak took the downstairs. Ray took the stairs. The upper floor had 4 rooms. He moved through them methodically. Master bedroom. Nothing in the obvious places. He worked the less obvious ones. Under the mattress, behind the mirror, the interior of the closet's upper shelf. Nothing. Second bedroom, Lena's room. He stood in the doorway of it for a moment before entering. It was very neat. A single bed, precisely made, a small desk with nothing on it, a bookshelf with a dozen books arranged by height, one stuffed animal on the bed. A bear, old and slightly faded, placed with the geometric precision of something positioned rather than kept. He opened the desk drawer. Pencils. A single-lined notepad. He flipped through it. Blank. He closed it. He stood in the center of Lena's room and looked at the walls. There were no drawings, no photographs, no marks on the paint where tape or pushpins had been. Nothing personal, nothing accumulated, nothing that indicated the ordinary barnacle growth of a child's existence in a space. It looked like a room that had been emptied and reset, repeatedly. The third room was a home office. This was where he found it, not immediately. The office had the same immaculate quality as the rest of the house. A desk, a filing cabinet, a bookshelf of binders organized by year and labeled in a uniform hand. Ray worked through the filing cabinet first. Insurance documents, property records, tax returns organized by year. At the back of the third drawer, a hanging file labeled Lena, medical. And inside it, exactly what you'd expect from an exceptionally organized guardian. Immunization records, pediatric visit notes, the specialist's letter regarding the platelet condition. He photographed everything with his phone. Then he turned to the desk. The desk had 3 drawers, 2 side drawers, shallow, containing office supplies, and a center drawer with a small lock. The lock was the old style, the kind that used a 2mm key, the kind that wasn't intended as serious security, but as the kind of resistance that told you something was important. He used a flathead jeweler's screwdriver from the kit in his jacket pocket and had it open in under 30 seconds. Inside the center drawer was a small black journal. Moleskin, soft cover, the elastic band worn from use. He picked it up. It was heavy with pages, dense with writing. He opened it. The handwriting was neat, vertical, unhurried. Dated entries, most of them short. He flipped to a random page near the middle, read 3 lines, and then stood very still for a moment. The entries were written as assessments. Each one began with a date and a brief behavioral note. Lena refuses eye contact, corrected 3 times for table posture. Or Lena, emotional outbursts during reading, required timeout. Written in the clinical language of a caregiver documenting legitimate behavioral management. The language was careful. Each entry described a punishment, never the word punishment, always correction or consequence, in terms that positioned Vivian as the reasonable, patient adult managing a challenging child. But the details were wrong. Small, wrong things that wouldn't register to anyone who wasn't looking for them, but that stacked into something undeniable when you read them in sequence. The timeouts described were in a room with no window, which the house didn't have on the upper floor but did have in the basement. The food restrictions described in a November entry 2 years ago, reduced meals as a response to behavioral non-compliance, were framed as a pediatrician-approved behavioral modification strategy, but the detail was specific enough to indicate duration, 4 days. The burn entry was there, dated and matter-of-fact. Lena sustained a minor burn injury during a kitchen accident while unsupervised. Ray had looked at those scars. The placement, the symmetry, the diameter. There was no kitchen accident in those marks. He photographed every page. He was on the 23rd page when Novak appeared in the doorway. "Problem," Novak said. His voice was exactly the same as it always was, which was why Ray stopped immediately. When Novak's voice didn't change, it meant the problem was significant enough that changing your voice would waste the time you needed for everything else. "What kind?" Ray said, not stopping the photography. "Car on the street. It's been there 8 minutes, engine running." Ray looked up. "Not a neighbor. I checked the driveway patterns on the way in. That vehicle isn't associated with any house on this block?" Ray looked at the journal in his hand. He had photographed 11 pages. He needed 23 more. "How much time do I have?" he asked. "Unknown," Novak said. "If it's surveillance, they've already seen the side door entry." Ray kept photographing. Page 24, 25. "Corrigan?" Ray said. "Possible. Or it's someone Vivian stationed there. She staged a stakeout on her own house while she's at the volunteer meeting?" "She knew the complaint came from outside," Novak said. "She doesn't know who or how much they know. She'd be stupid not to cover the house tonight." He paused. "She's not stupid." Page 28. Page 29. 30 seconds, Ray said. Novak didn't argue. He went back to the window. Ray photographed the remaining pages in 31 seconds, some of them at an angle, some blurred from the speed. Then he closed the journal, replaced it in the center drawer exactly as he'd found it, relocked it. He scanned the desk surface to confirm nothing was disturbed, closed the filing cabinet drawer, crossed the office. He was in the hallway when he heard the front door. Not the sound of someone about to enter, the sound of someone entering. The particular click and swing of a door that had been opened with a key by someone who lived there and had no reason to be careful about the noise. Vivian Mercerfield was home 3 hours early. Ray stood at the top of the stairs in absolute darkness. Below him, the sound of a coat being removed, boots on the hardwood, practical boots, medium heel, the footstep pattern of someone who moved through her own space with total confidence. A light came on in the hallway below. Ray could see the edge of it reaching the bottom 2 steps. He had 4 seconds before she reached the staircase. He moved to the right, away from the stairs, into the master bedroom, and went flat against the wall beside the door. His heartbeat was elevated but not uncontrolled. He had his phone in his left hand and his right hand open and empty. He thought about Novak, somewhere in the house, doing the same calibration. Below, Vivian's footsteps moved away from the stairs, into the kitchen. The refrigerator opened and closed, water running briefly, then the footsteps moved toward the back of the house, toward the home office. Ray breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow, controlled, the kind of breathing that cost you effort, but bought you stillness. The office light came on. He heard the desk chair, the sound of her settling. Then silence. The silence of someone reading, working. He heard the center drawer open. the soft sound of a book being handled. She was checking the journal. He put himself very flat against the wall and did not breathe for 4 seconds. The sound of her moving through the pages. Then, nothing. Nothing bad. No change in the quality of the silence below. She was reading an entry, or making a new one. She wasn't comparing angles to the way she'd left it. She was just using it. He closed his eyes briefly, opened them, waited. He was standing in the bedroom of a woman who had been systematically abusing a child for 4 years, who had woven herself into the institutional fabric of the county's protective systems, who had weathered every complaint and inspection and discredited every person who had ever come close to the truth. He was standing in her bedroom in the dark, in the house she'd built as a performance of virtue, and in the pocket of his jacket he had photographs of the record she kept for herself. The office light went off. Footsteps. Back toward the kitchen. The refrigerator again. The microwave. The particular domestic sounds of someone settling in for an early evening. She wasn't going back to the volunteer meeting, which meant she was here for the night, which meant the car outside was still outside, which meant Ray and Novak were inside a house with its occupant and a surveillance presence outside, and the window for a clean exit had just become a problem. Ray moved to the bedroom window, carefully, keeping the movement slow enough that the floor didn't register weight in any creak that carried, and looked down at the side yard below. 8-foot drop to frost-hard ground. Survivable. The side door they'd come in through was below him and 30 feet to the left, within sight of the street where the car was sitting. He looked at his phone. He typed to Novak, "Still inside / she's here / watching kitchen. Side doors exposed. Exit options." Novak's response came back in 12 seconds. "Back porch / north side / not visible from street / can exit through the garden. Join me at the porch door." Ray came out of the master bedroom and moved down the hallway in the dark, keeping to the wall where the boards were seated most securely. The kitchen sounds were consistent below. Vivian moving between the counter and the microwave, the quiet of someone alone in their own house at the end of a long day. He reached the back of the hallway. There was a door there, a linen closet, and beside it, a narrow back staircase. The old servant's stair of a Victorian structure, uncarpeted and steep. He found it by feel, kept his hand on the wall, went down. The back stair came out into a mudroom off the back porch. Novak was already there, pressed against the exterior wall beside the porch door, visible as a shape and a pair of steady eyes. Ray crossed to him. They exchanged no words. Novak opened the porch door with the kind of slowness that produced no sound whatsoever, and they went out into the freezing rain. The back garden was dark and dormant, dead growth, bare beds, a stone path running to a back gate that opened onto the alley. They moved through it quickly, single file, Novak leading, and through the back gate and into the alley, and then they were out, with the cold and the dark and the rain wrapping around them and the house receding behind them. They reached the bikes in 11 minutes, coming in from the north side, approaching on foot. The car was still on the street, a dark sedan, engine ticking over, visible from the intersection. As they passed at the far end of the block, Ray glanced without turning his head. In the front seat, a man he didn't recognize. Middle-aged, baseball cap, the particular alert stillness of someone watching a location, not parked, not a deputy's cruiser, not a patrol vehicle, a personal car. Ray filed that away and kept walking. They were 2 blocks from the bikes when the adrenaline started to metabolize, which was when the shaking wanted to come. Not fear, just chemistry, the body processing what it had already done. Ray controlled it by setting his jaw and walking. Novak, ahead of him, showed nothing. They reached the fire road, mounted the bikes. Ray kept the engine low and rode out through the back way, past the lumber yard, and didn't hit the main road until they were far enough from the house that the sound wouldn't carry back. Then he opened the throttle and rode. The rain hit his face shield in a continuous sheet, the headlight sweeping the wet road, the Harley's engine running its familiar low insistence beneath him. He let himself breathe fully for the first time in 2 hours. His phone was in his jacket pocket with photographs of 29 journal pages. He had what he'd gone in for, and he had something else. The car. The unknown man. The fact that Vivian had come home 3 hours early. The fact that she'd gone straight to the journal. Not the filing cabinet, not the medical records, not anything else. straight to the journal, as if she'd been worried about it, as if something had made her worry about it. Or someone. Ray turned that over as he wrote. She hadn't come home early because she knew they'd been there. There was no sign they'd been there. Novak was meticulous and Ray had replaced everything. She'd come home early because she was worried. Because something in her landscape had shifted and she could feel it, which meant she knew something was wrong, which meant she was already moving. He pulled into the Mountain Rest parking lot at 9:15. Dutch's truck was parked alongside the line of Harleys, a light on in the room that served as the Brotherhood's staging area. Ray went directly there, knocked twice, and went in. Dutch was at the small table with a phone and a map. Briggs was in the corner. Wren was in the other chair, both hands around a coffee cup, his white braid over one shoulder, his old face entirely still. Ray pulled out his phone and set it on the table in front of Dutch. 29 pages, he said. The journal exists. It says what we thought it would say, and it's in the center drawer of the desk in the home office, locked with a standard 2mm. Dutch looked at the phone. He didn't pick it up yet. Up. Any contact? She came home early, Ray said. We exited clean, but there was a vehicle on the street. Surveillance. Personal car, not official. Description? Ray gave it. Dutch looked at Briggs. Briggs made a note. She went straight to the journal when she got home, Ray said, before anything else, which means she's been thinking about it, which means she's either moving to secure it or move it. She can't destroy it, Novak said, coming in behind Ray and closing the door. He hadn't spoken since the alley, and his voice in the room sounded like something that had been waiting a long time to be useful. It's her record. She's been keeping it for 15 years. It's the only version of events she has complete control over. You destroy it, you lose the only reliable account of her own thinking. She'd move it, Dutch said, somewhere outside the house. Or photograph it digitally and destroy the physical, Briggs said. She's not digital, Ray said, with certainty he couldn't fully explain but felt completely. Everything about her is physical, tactile. The house, the journal, the paperwork. She lives in objects she can touch and control. Dutch picked up the phone. He looked at the photographs for a long time, scrolling slowly, reading. The room was quiet. The rain was still going outside, a low percussion on the roof of the Mountain Rest, the highway sound muted by it. Dutch set the phone down. The burn entry, he said. The one about the kitchen accident. Yeah. She dated it. April 14th, 2 years ago. He looked at Wren. Wren already had his own phone out. Check pediatric clinic records for Harlan Creek, April 2022. Any documented injury presentation for a female minor, 6 to 7 years of age. Wren worked quietly for a few minutes, moving through something on his phone. Then he stopped. There's an urgent care note, he said, filed with Cascade County Health Services database. April 16th, 2022. Minor female, age 6. Burn injuries to left upper arm. Recorded cause. Kitchen accident, unsupervised. Signed off by the attending, Dr. Marcus Fenn. Fenn, Dutch said. He's a GP in Harlan Creek, Wren said. Opened his practice here 9 years ago. He paused. He's been Vivian's personal physician for 8 of them. The room got a particular kind of quiet. She has a doctor, Briggs said slowly. She has a doctor, Dutch confirmed. Not someone who had been deceived. Someone who had made a clinical judgment about the cause of a burn injury that any pediatric practitioner should have flagged as suspicious, and had written the explanation Vivian needed. Ray sat down on the edge of the nearest bed. He looked at the wall. He was doing the math, and the math kept coming out the same way. The CPS liaison position, Vivian inside the oversight system, flagged in advance of every complaint. The regional director and case supervisor at her annual gala. Relationships built over years, influence deployed without ever having to make it explicit. Paula Reese's clean inspection reports, pre-informed of the dates, the system's ground level. Dr. Fenn's injury documentation, the medical cover, Deputy Corrigan's absolute institutional trust, law enforcement, the school principal who'd removed Grant from the property, education. One woman, 15 years. Every pillar of child protection in Harlan Creek and its county infrastructure, not corrupted by money or coercion, corrupted by relationship, by the slow, patient work of being exactly what everyone needed in every context, and being that thing long enough that no one could imagine the alternative. "This isn't a case," Ray said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. "This isn't something we can take to county investigators and have them review. They're inside it." "Not all of them," Dutch said. "Some of them are just wrong, which is different from complicit." "How many does it take?" Ray said. "One person at the right level who owes her enough." "Ray." Dutch's voice was level and final. "I hear you. But we're not abandoning the legal approach because the legal approach has obstacles. We're going to find the person inside the system who isn't inside this." He held Ray's gaze. "They exist. They always exist. There's always someone who doesn't fit the pattern." Ray looked at him. He wanted to believe that. He did believe it, in some abstract version of the world that existed outside this storage unit, and that corkboard and the journal in the locked desk. Then Ren said, Both men looked at him. Ren was looking at his phone with the expression of a man who had just found something he didn't expect. He set the phone on the table slowly, the way you set something down when you need both hands free to deal with what comes next. "The community liaison position," Ren said. "Vivian's been in it for 4 years. He paused. "The position was created by the county board at the recommendation of the regional director of family services." "We already know that," Briggs said. "The regional director at the time was a man named Carter Gale," Ren said. "He retired from the position 14 months ago." Another pause. "His replacement, current regional director of Cascade County Department of Family Services, is a woman named Sandra Gale." Nobody spoke. "His daughter," Ren said. "Sandra Gale is Carter Gale's daughter. She's been in the position for 13 months. He looked at Dutch. "She was at Vivian's gala 6 weeks ago. There's a photograph. Vivian's arm around her, both of them laughing." Dutch sat back in his chair. He picked up his coffee. He looked at the ceiling. "The man who created the position," Dutch said, "and the woman who now holds the power over it. Same family." 1 degree apart, Novak said from his position by the door. "She didn't need to corrupt the whole system. She just needed to own the top of it." Ray stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain-wet parking lot, at the row of Harleys standing dark and patient in the lot, their chrome catching the motel's floodlight in thin silver lines. He looked at them for a long time. 6 bikes. 6 men. A voice recorder. Photographs of 29 journal pages. A man with a corkboard and 4 years of almost. A girl in a Cascade Foothills house waiting for a sister she hadn't seen in 6 years. He thought about Dutch saying there's always someone who doesn't fit the pattern. He turned back around. "Brielle gets here tomorrow morning," he said. "Yes," Dutch said. "She's family, blood family. She has legal standing to contest guardianship that none of us have." Ray looked at Dutch. "And she's been out of Harlan Creek for 6 years. Vivian hasn't had 6 years to work on her." Dutch looked at him steadily. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Ray said, "that Brielle Cross may be the one person in this situation who exists completely outside Vivian's architecture." He paused. "She can make the complaint. She can initiate the formal challenge. And if she does it at the right level, not county, not regional, if she goes to the state oversight board, above Sandra Gale, above the regional structure entirely, it's a longer process," Dutch said. "It's a cleaner one. We can't use the journal directly, but Brielle can petition for a formal independent review with documentation of a pattern of concern. She files it at the state level with everything Grant has, everything on the recorder, and the journal photographs as context for where to look and what to ask for." He paused. "And if the independent review assigns an investigator who hasn't been to Vivian's gala, it's a gamble," Dutch said. "Everything left to us is a gamble," Ray said. Dutch held his gaze. Then he looked at the table, at the phone with 29 pages of journal on it, at the map of Harlan Creek. "Briggs," Dutch said, "State Oversight Board for Child Welfare in this jurisdiction. Who are they, and how do we reach them?" Briggs was already on his laptop, and that was the moment. The room rearranging itself around a new axis, the men moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had found the direction of effort and were committing to it. That Ray's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A number he didn't recognize. A 503 area code. Portland. He answered. Is this the man who found Lena? The voice was young, female, controlled with the specific control of someone who was terrified and refusing to perform it. Grant gave me this number. He said I should call you. He said, a breath. He said you're trying to help her. Yes, Ray said. This is Ray. Are you Brielle? I'm 4 hours out, she said. I've been driving since Grant called this morning. I pulled over because I needed to… Another breath. Not quite steady. I needed to know she's okay. Grant said she's okay, but I needed to hear it from someone else. Someone I don't know. Because I need it to be true. Ray looked at the window, at the rain. She's safe, he said. She's warm. She's been drawing. She drew a house tonight with a door on it. He paused. She knows you're coming. A silence on the line, long enough that he thought the call had dropped. Then, she drew a door. Yeah. Another silence. What do I need to do? Brielle said. When I get there, what do I need to do to get her out? Ray looked at Dutch. Dutch was watching him. The room was watching him. I need you to be willing to stand up in front of people who've believed the wrong thing for a long time, Ray said. And I need you to not be afraid of them. I'm not afraid of anything except losing her again, Brielle said. Ray believed her completely. Then drive carefully, he said, and get here. He ended the call. Outside, the rain intensified, a true Pacific Northwest downpour, sheeting against the motel windows, hammering the parking lot, running in channels across the asphalt. The Harleys stood in it, immovable, chrome, going dark and wet. Briggs looked up from the laptop. State Oversight Board. The contact is a senior investigator named Thomas Wilder, based in Olympia. He has no documented connection to anyone in the Cascade County structure. Does he have a phone? Dutch said. Cell numbers in the public record, Briggs said. Dutch looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10:47 at night. He looked at Ray. You call him, Dutch said. Not me, not Grant. You. I'm the worst? You're the one who found her, Dutch said. You're the one with the recorder. You're the one who went into that house. He held Ray's gaze. You're the first link in the chain, which means you're the one who has to put your name on it, all of it, including the house. Ray understood what Dutch was telling him. He was telling him that the legal path required someone to confess to the illegal one. He was telling him that the only person who could hand Thomas Wilder a coherent account from the beginning was the one person in the situation whose credibility was already the weakest. The ex-con who'd been in the wrong place at the right time, who'd broken into a woman's home without a warrant, who'd been asking questions around town since the morning after a child disappeared. He was telling him that the keystone of their entire case was Ray Mercer putting his own freedom on the table. Ray sat with that. The rain came down outside. He thought about Lena drawing a house with a door. He picked up the phone. He dialed the number Briggs read out. It rang twice. Wilder, said a man's voice. Alert, despite the hour. The voice of someone who kept his phone close because experience had taught him that the calls that mattered. Thomas Wilder listened for 41 minutes without interrupting. Ray sat on the edge of the motel bed and talked. He started at Route 31, and the headlight and the shape in the dark, and he went straight through without stopping. Lena's temperature, the zip ties, Evelyn, the recorder, Harlan Creek, Grant's corkboard, the banquet photograph, the liaison position, the journal, the house, all of it. He put his own name on every illegal thing he'd done. He didn't soften any of it. Dutch sat across from him and watched him the way you watched someone do something that cost them, with the particular stillness of someone who understood the price and wasn't going to look away from it. When Ray finished, Wilder was quiet for 8 seconds. Then, the photographs of the journal. Can you transmit them to a secure number tonight? Yes, Ray said. The audio recording of the child. Same. Yes. The complainant, Grant Holloway. He's available to give a formal statement. Tomorrow morning. And the child's sister is en route. 4 hours out, maybe less by now. Another pause. Mr. Mercer? Wilder's voice was careful, professional. The voice of a man who had learned not to let what he felt about something interfere with what he needed to do about it. I'm going to make 2 calls tonight. I'm going to need you to stay reachable and stay out of contact with the Harlan Creek Sheriff's Department until I tell you otherwise. Can you do that? Yes, Ray said. I'm also going to need you to understand that the unauthorized entry— I know, Ray said. I'm not in a position to— I know, Ray said again. I'm not asking you to be. A beat. Transmit what you have, Wilder said. Tonight. The call ended. Ray looked at Dutch. Dutch said nothing. He picked up his own phone and began organizing the transmission. Briggs created the secure channel. The photographs went first, all 29 pages, then the audio file from Evelyn's recorder, compressed and labeled. They were transmitted and confirmed received at 11:58. Nobody slept. At 2 a.m, Ray's phone buzzed. A text from Wilder. Investigative authority confirmed. State level. Moving at first light. Do not contact local LE. Do not move the child. Dutch read it over Ray's shoulder. First light, Dutch said. 4 hours, Briggs said. Dutch looked at the room, at his men, at Ray. Wren, Hatch, Teller. 3 hours. Briggs and Novak, you're up. He looked at Ray. You don't sleep. No, Ray said. Dutch sat back down. Then we wait. Waiting was its own kind of violence. Ray had learned that in the years before the Brotherhood, in the years when waiting meant something bad was building, and you had no way to accelerate the outcome. He sat at the table and drank cold coffee, and watched the clock, and did not let himself think about what happened if Wilder's 2 phone calls hadn't landed where they needed to land. If the State Oversight Board had its own version of Sandra Gale. If the architecture went higher than they'd mapped it. At 4:40 in the morning, headlights came into the parking lot. Not a patrol car, not a threat. A blue Honda Civic with a cracked left taillight and Portland plates, driven fast and parked without precision, the door opening before the engine was fully off. Brielle Cross was 22 years old, and she moved like someone who had been clenching every muscle in her body for the entire 4-hour drive. She was medium height, dark-haired like Lena, with the same quality in her eyes, that calibrated watchfulness, but wearing it differently, wearing it outward instead of inward, as aggression rather than defense. She scanned the parking lot in one sweep, found Ray standing at the motel room door, and crossed to him in 9 strides. Where is she? Brielle said. Safe house. 40 minutes from here. Ray held her gaze. She's sleeping. We're not moving her until first light when Wilder's people arrive. Brielle looked at him, measuring. You're Ray. Yes. Grant says you broke into Vivian's house. Yes. Grant says you called the State Oversight Board and put your own name on it. Yes. Brielle stared at him for another 2 seconds. Then she walked past him into the motel room, looked at Dutch and the others, looked at the table with the maps and the phone and the cold coffee, looked at Briggs's laptop and the photographs still on the screen. She sat down. Tell me everything I need to do, she said. They told her. She asked 3 precise questions and listened to the answers with the focused attention of someone who had spent 6 years building a life, specifically so she'd be ready for the moment she could come back. She signed the documentation Wilder had transmitted for the formal family petition. She read 6 pages of Grant's evidence file without expression. When she reached the school photographs, the ones where the bruising was visible at the sleeve edge, her jaw set and she put them face down on the table. Okay, she said. That was all. First light came at 7:12. 3 vehicles arrived at the mountain rest at 7:21, 2 unmarked state vehicles and a third with Washington state official plates. Thomas Wilder was in the second car. He was 50, compact, with the face of someone who had been doing this specific kind of work long enough that outrage had been refined into precision. He shook Ray's hand, looked at him without judgment, and said, You transmitted everything you told me about. Yes, Ray said. Then let's go. What happened next happened fast, in the way that things happen fast when institutional momentum finally broke in the right direction. Wilder's authority superseded the county structure entirely. He had a state-level investigative mandate that required no cooperation from Dale Corrigan or the Regional Family Services Office or anyone in Vivian's architecture. He had 2 investigators with him and a third coming from the county seat. He had Brielle's signed petition. He had 40 minutes of audio from a 7-year-old. He had 29 pages of a black journal. They drove to Evelyn's in convoy. Ray rode the Harley. Dutch rode beside him. The others followed in a loose formation, 6 bikes. The engines quiet in the frozen morning air, the road running between walls of dark pine under a sky that was beginning, finally, to pale at the edges. The convoy reached Evelyn's at 7:58. Brielle got out of Wilder's car and walked to the front door, and Ray hung back, because this part wasn't his. He stood beside the Harley and watched Brielle knock on Evelyn's door, and watched the door open and watched Evelyn take in the scene behind Brielle. The cars, the investigators, the row of bikes. With the flat, capable assessment of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this kind of organized arrival. Then Lena appeared in the doorway. She looked at Brielle. Brielle looked at her, 6 years. 6 years and a doorway, and the distance of 3 steps, and then Lena crossed it, and Brielle went down to her knees on the porch, and Ray looked away. Dutch came to stand beside him. Neither of them spoke. The morning was very still. "We still have a problem," Dutch said quietly. Ray looked at him. "Corrigan is going to know Wilder's here within the hour. When he knows, Vivian knows." Dutch paused. "She'll move to her position. She'll call Fenn, she'll call the school board, she'll call everyone who owes her, and she'll start the counter-narrative before Wilder can finish interviewing Lena." "Wilder knows that," Ray said. "Knowing it and having a resource to counter it are different things." Dutch looked at the porch, where Wilder was now speaking quietly to Brielle, his investigators visible through the window with Evelyn. "She's going to have 20 people standing behind her at the county building saying the same things they've always said. She's going to look like the injured party. Wilder's investigation can survive that, but it's going to take longer than a day. And every day Lena isn't formally in Brielle's custody. She's still technically Vivian's ward." Ray understood. "She needs to see it," he said. "Whatever she does to counter it needs to happen where people can see what she does instead of what she says she does." Dutch looked at him. "How many riders do we have in the region?" Ray said. Dutch was quiet for a moment. "I can make calls." "How many?" "By tonight, 12. By tomorrow morning," Dutch paused. 20, 25, maybe more. There are 3 Brotherhood chapters within riding distance. And there are others who aren't Brotherhood who'd come for something like this. Ray looked at the porch, at the investigators going in and out with folders, at Brielle sitting with Lena on the porch steps now, Lena's head against Brielle's shoulder, Brielle's arm around her, neither of them moving. "Call them," Ray said. Dutch pulled out his phone. It took 6 hours. 6 hours of Wilder's investigators working through Evelyn's house and then through Grant's storage unit and then through the formal complaint documentation. 6 hours of Brielle giving her statement. 2 hours of it, methodical, detailed, covering 6 years of observations that she had been building into her own private accounting since the day she'd walked out of Vivian's house at 16. 6 hours of Grant Holloway finally being in a room where the person across the table was writing down what he said, instead of explaining why he was wrong. During those 6 hours, the motorcycles arrived. Not in groups. One at a time, or in pairs, coming in from the highway, parking at the mountain rest, engines going quiet. By noon, there were 11. By 3 in the afternoon, 18. By 5, 23 bikes stood in the mountain rest parking lot, and the men who had ridden them stood outside in the cold, not talking much, not performing anything, just present. The way certain things were present, with weight, with stillness, with the particular quality of attention that came from people who had survived things and were now choosing, deliberately, where to stand. None of them had been asked to do anything except show up. They showed up. At 5:47, Wilder called Ray. "We're moving to the county administration building," Wilder said. "I have a formal interview scheduled with Vivian Mercerfield at 6:30. I'll have a temporary protective custody order ready to file the moment the interview concludes. Brielle Cross can take Lena immediately after." "Is it enough?" Ray said. "The journal alone," Wilder paused. "The journal is extraordinary. She wrote it as protection, but she was too detailed, too specific. Dates, durations, exact descriptions. It reads as a record of deliberate, sustained abuse written in the hand of someone who had convinced themselves it was justified. A beat. Combined with the child's testimony and Brielle's statement and the pattern of prior placements, yes, it's enough for emergency removal and the beginning of a criminal investigation." "What about Fenn, Corrigan, Sandra Gale?" Separate processes, longer, but they're started. He paused. Mr. Mercer, the unauthorized entry. I know, Ray said. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, Wilder said. But the photographs were submitted as leads pointing to the journal's location, not as evidence themselves. Brielle petitioned independently for access to the home under family review provisions. My investigators executed a formal warrant this afternoon. He paused again. The warrant found the journal where you told me it would be. Ray said nothing. I'm not a defense attorney, Wilder said, but I'd suggest you have one ready. I understand, Ray said. He ended the call and looked at Dutch. It's tonight, he said. Dutch turned to the parking lot. 23 bikes, 23 men in dark leather in the cold December afternoon. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a speech. He just looked at them and said, County Administration Building, 6 o'clock. We park, and we stand, and we don't say a word unless someone speaks to us first. Understood? 23 people indicated in various ways that they understood. Ray went to the end of the parking lot and stood for a moment alone. He thought about what was coming, what Vivian would do when she walked into that county building and found the parking lot full of motorcycles and men who had no official role in anything, who were simply there, visible, witnesses to a public moment that she had spent 15 years making sure would never come. He thought about the particular way that a performance collapsed when the audience already knew it was a performance. He thought about Lena's voice on the recorder, 40 minutes of patient, devastating account delivered in the vocabulary of a child who had learned to call her own suffering by the names her abuser had given it. He thought about Sophie. He let himself do it. He let it exist in the same moment as everything else. The parking lot, the bikes, the cold, the county building 6 miles east, Lena on a porch with her sister's arm around her. He let Sophie be there in the same space as all of it, the purple backpack with the broken zipper, the laugh that took over her whole body, the hand raised in a wave that was already turning away. He let it hurt. He let it hurt fully for the first time in 11 months without riding away from it. Then he put his helmet on and walked back to the Harley. The bikes started one by one, each engine joining the previous until the sound was total, that rolling, layered thunder that built from several directions into a single weather system. 23 Harleys in a December parking lot, exhaust rising white in the cold air, headlights cutting through the early dark. Ray pulled out first. Dutch fell in beside him. Behind them, the others followed, not in a formation of performance, but in the loose, staggered pattern of people who had ridden together long enough to know each other's rhythms, who maintained spacing not by instruction but by instinct, who existed in a collective configuration that felt, to anyone who witnessed it, less like a group of individuals and more like a single organism that had decided to move in one direction. The county building was 6 miles east. The road was empty. The engines rolled. And at the county building, at that precise moment, Vivian Mercerfield was walking up the front steps in her good coat, her face arranged into the composed, sorrowful dignity of a woman wrongly accused, ready to do what she had done 100 times before in 100 smaller rooms: explain, reframe, redirect, and walk out with her reputation intact and her architecture undamaged. She had not yet seen the parking lot. She had not yet seen what was coming down the road toward her, headlights cutting through the dark. The sound of it arriving before she could see its face, a low rolling thunder that she felt in her chest before she heard it with her ears, the sound of something that had decided it was done being quiet about. Vivian Mercerfield heard them before she saw them. She was standing on the top step of the county administration building, her good coat buttoned to the throat, her face arranged into the expression she had spent 15 years perfecting: composed grief, dignified restraint, the face of a woman enduring something unjust with extraordinary grace. She had her prepared statement in her coat pocket. She had Harlan Creek's institutional memory on her side. She had walked into rooms like this one 100 times and walked out of every single one of them intact. Then the sound reached her, low and rolling at first, coming from the west, building the way weather built, not arriving all at once, but accumulating, layer upon layer, until it was no longer a sound in the background but the primary fact of the night. 23 engines. 23 headlights appearing around the bend in the county road, staggered and steady, moving at the particular pace of something that had decided it was in no hurry because it had already arrived. They filled the parking lot without a word. The engines died one by one in sequence, and each silence was its own statement, and when the last one went quiet, the night was very still, and 23 men in dark leather stood in the cold December air under the courthouse lights and looked at nothing in particular and said nothing at all. Vivian looked at them. She had prepared for many things. She had not prepared for this. Not for the sheer physical fact of that many people, that much deliberate stillness, that quality of witness that required no signs and made no demands and simply existed, present, patient, immovable. She had built her entire architecture on the premise that the people who knew the truth had no standing, that standing required respectability, credentials, institutional belonging, that a woman with a gala and a liaison title and 15 years of community trust would always outrank a convicted felon, a discredited uncle, a runaway teenager. She had not calculated for 23 men who didn't need standing because they weren't making an argument. They were simply there. Her hands, inside her coat pockets, had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. She went inside. The interview lasted 90 minutes. Ray wasn't in it. He stood in the parking lot with the others, and he watched the building's lit windows, and he did not let himself think about what was happening inside. Dutch stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. At some point, Wren produced a thermos of coffee from somewhere and passed it along the line without comment, and each man took it and drank and passed it on. The building's front door opened at 8:19. Thomas Wilder came out first. He crossed the steps and walked to Ray directly, stopping in front of him, and his face told the story before he opened his mouth. Not triumph, because Wilder was not a man who did triumph, but the particular quality of exhausted certainty that came after the right outcome in a situation that should never have required this much effort. "Emergency protective custody order is signed," Wilder said. "Lena Cross is formally released from Vivian Mercerfield's guardianship as of tonight. Brielle Cross assumes temporary custodial authority pending formal hearing." He paused. "Criminal referral filed tonight. Child abuse, obstruction of child welfare proceedings. Dr. Fenn has already been contacted by state medical licensing. Paula Reese is suspended pending an internal review. Sandra Gale has been notified that her office is under audit." Ray said nothing. "The warrant on the house is extended," Wilder continued. "My investigators will be there at first light." A beat. "The Journal is going to do most of the work." Dutch spoke beside Ray. "And Corrigan?" "He'll be interviewed," Wilder said. "I don't believe he's actively complicit. I believe he trusted the wrong person for a very long time and stopped asking questions." He looked at Ray. "That's a different problem, but it's his problem now, not yours." He started back toward the building, stopped, turned. "Mr. Mercer." He held Ray's gaze for a moment. "The DA's office in this county is not under Cascade County Family Services. The assistant DA has been briefed on the unauthorized entry." A pause. "She's chosen not to pursue charges, given the totality of circumstances and the evidence it led to." Another pause. "Don't make her regret that." "I won't," Ray said. Wilder nodded, went back inside. The cold moved through the parking lot. The courthouse lights hummed. Somewhere behind the building, a car started and drove away, and Ray knew without seeing it who was in that car and where she was going, and he felt nothing except the particular exhaustion of a thing being over. He saw Vivian Mercerfield exactly once more through the glass doors of the building's lobby. Her coat still buttoned, her posture still controlled, walking beside a county official with her chin level. She was performing composure for an audience that was no longer watching her the way audiences once had. The room she walked through had a different quality now. Everyone in it knew what Wilder's people had found on those 29 pages, and knowledge changed the architecture of a room in ways that no performance could fully counter. She didn't look at the parking lot. Ray looked away. They drove to Evelyn's at 9 o'clock. The convoy's smaller now. Just Dutch and Ray and Novak and Wren, the others dispersing back toward their own roads with the quiet economy of people who had done what they came to do and needed nothing in return for it. The night was very cold and very clear. The earlier rain gone, the sky opening above the pines to show actual stars for the first time in days. Lena was awake when they arrived. She was sitting on Evelyn's couch with Brielle's arm around her, both of them under the wool blanket. Brielle's head bent close to Lena's, speaking quietly. Grant was in the armchair, looking at nothing with the hollowed expression of a man who had held something up by force of will for so long that when the weight was finally lifted, he didn't know yet what his body was supposed to do. Evelyn had made coffee. Of course she had. Ray stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the room, at the wood stove burning the same way it had been burning the night he'd carried Lena in out of the frozen dark, at the familiar amber warmth of it, at these people gathered in it, not chosen by blood or circumstance exactly, but by the specific gravity of a single night on a nameless highway, a child's voice saying, "Please help me," and everyone in this room who had followed that gravity all the way to its end. Lena saw him. She got up from the couch, slowly, carefully, Brielle's hand trailing from her shoulder, and crossed the room and stopped in front of him. She looked up at him with those dark, enormous eyes that had been doing their careful accounting since the first moment the flashlight found them. "Is it done?" she asked. "Yes," Ray said. She nodded. Once. The nod of someone filing a fact. Then she put her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his jacket, and Ray stood very still for a moment before he put one hand on the back of her head, and neither of them said anything else because there wasn't anything else that needed to be said. Brielle watched from the couch. Her eyes were bright and careful, and she didn't look away. But she didn't interrupt it either, and Ray met her gaze over Lena's head and understood that Brielle Cross was not someone who missed things or forgave things easily, but was someone who knew the difference between a person who took from people and a person who gave, and had already made her determination on which category he fell into. Grant looked at his hands. Evelyn handed Dutch a coffee mug without being asked. Dutch took it without comment and drank, and looked at the wood stove with the expression of a man who was allowing himself, for this specific moment, to stop carrying something. They stayed for an hour. Nobody talked much. What there was to say had mostly been said in other rooms, and on the record, and into voice recorders, and in front of people whose job it was to write things down and act on them. What was left was just this: warmth and the smell of coffee, and the sound of Brielle saying something quiet to Lena that made Lena laugh. A small laugh, surprised out of her, the kind that seemed to surprise her, too. Ray looked at the door when he heard it. It was the sound of a child laughing in a house she was safe in. He looked away before his face did anything he'd need to account for. When they left, it was almost 11. The temperature had dropped further, the frost coming back hard on the cleared ground, the pine branches holding their cold weight against the dark. Ray pulled on his jacket in the yard while Dutch and the others got to their bikes. Brielle came to the door. "She's going to ask about you," Brielle said. Quietly. Not an accusation, a fact delivered straight. "That's okay," Ray said. "What should I tell her?" He thought about it. "Tell her the truth. That I'm around." He paused. "That I ride through sometimes." Brielle looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said. She said it the way people said things when the word was completely insufficient, and they said it anyway because nothing else existed. Ray nodded. He went to the Harley. He rode out behind Dutch and Novak and Wren, the four of them taking the fire road back to the highway and then turning west. The road opened up ahead of them, the same highway he'd been riding 11 days ago with no destination and no intention of arriving anywhere. Same dark, same trees, same cold that came through even the best gear at speed. Except the Harley ran differently. Not mechanically. The Harley ran exactly the same knock, the same low-register grumble, the same vibration through the grips that he knew the way he knew his own heartbeat. But something in the way he sat on it was different. Something in the weight of it. 11 months of riding to get away from something. He was riding now and there was nothing behind him he was running from. Dutch pulled alongside him on a long straight, and they rode that way for a while, side by side, the highway empty ahead of them, the pine walls dark on both sides and the sky above them cold and full of stars. Dutch looked over once. Ray looked back. Nothing was said. Everything was said. 2 miles past the Harlan Creek town line, on the right side of the highway, the lights of an all-night diner appeared in the dark. Kettle and Pine Roadhouse. Not the one on Main Street, a different one. a highway diner that had been open since 1962 and showed no signs of reconsidering. Dutch put on his signal without being asked. They pulled in. They sat at the counter, four of them, leathers dripping the last of the night's cold, and a woman who had seen everything the highway could produce poured coffee without being asked and left them alone. And they drank it in the particular silence of men who had been through something together and didn't need to narrate it. Outside, the highway ran east and west. Somewhere east, a little girl was sleeping under a wool blanket in a warm house with her sister's arm around her. Somewhere in the county seat, a warrant was being prepared and a case was being built, and a woman who had spent 15 years being believed was going to spend a long time being known. Somewhere in a storage unit on the edge of a lumber yard, a man was finally sleeping, really sleeping, for the first time in 4 years. Ray wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. The heat came through the ceramic into his palms, and the diner smelled of old grease and fresh coffee and the particular human warmth of a place that stayed open for people who needed a place to land, and outside the dark highway waited, not as an escape anymore, not as a distance to put between himself and everything that hurt, but simply as a road, going somewhere, carrying whoever chose to ride it. Dutch refilled his own cup from the carafe the woman had left on the counter. "You staying?" Dutch said. Ray looked at his coffee. "For a while," he said. "Yeah." Dutch nodded, drank. "Sophie would have liked her," Wren said, from the far end of the counter. Quiet, not looking up from his mug. Ray was still for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "She would have." The diner hummed. The coffee stayed hot. Outside, the Harleys stood in the parking lot in the dark, patient and still, chrome catching the diner's neon in thin red lines, waiting for morning the way they always waited, without complaint, without urgency, ready for whenever the riders were ready to carry them wherever they needed to go next.